Welcome to Tales by Imon. Tonight, we begin a story of rain, regret, and the one case that refused to stay buried. This is chapter 1 of The Final Twist in the Detective's Last Case. The rain didn't just fall on Ridley City, it attacked. It hammered the asphalt, turning the neon reflections of the downtown skyline into blurred, bleeding watercolors. From his desk on the 3rd floor of the 17th precinct, Detective Art Jensen watched the storm, nursing a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt ambition. He had exactly 7 days left. 7 days until retirement. 7 days until the weight of the badge, the ghosts in the case files, and the acidic coffee were finally someone else's problem. His desk was a relic, a scarred oak battlefield cluttered with cold cases and one small, meticulously cared for cactus. The phone rang, splitting the air with a shrillness that grated on his last nerve. He let it ring twice more before snatching the receiver. Jensen. Homicide. Art. It's Miller. Down at the apex. Art sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Captain Miller. Of course. What's the occasion, Captain? Don't tell me the mayor lost his wallet. A heavy silence met him. Miller wasn't a man for small talk, especially not at 2 in the morning. It's Harrison Vance, Miller said, his voice flat. He's dead, Art. And the scene, it's a puzzle box. Art froze. Harrison Vance. The billionaire recluse. The Phantom of Ridley City. Vance was less a person and more a myth, a tech mogul who hadn't been seen in public in nearly a decade, yet whose company, Nexus, basically owned the city's entire infrastructure. Suicide? Art asked, already knowing the answer. If it is, he did it the hard way, Miller grunted. Penthouse. Locked from the inside. Biometrically sealed. No one in, no one out. And your lead. Lead. Captain, I'm cleaning out my desk. I'm on the short-timer list. Give it to Chen. Give it to anyone. Chen's already there. She's the one who called it in. But this one, Art, this one is high profile. The commissioner wants his best. He wants the man who closes cases. That's still you, detective. 7 more days, anyway. Get down here. The line clicked dead. Art stared at the receiver. He hadn't wanted a last case. He'd spent 30 years closing cases for other people, the victims, the families, the city. He just wanted to close his own. He finished the toxic coffee in one gulp, grabbed his trench coat, a garment that smelled perpetually of damp wool and stale cigars, and walked out into the storm. The Apex building wasn't just a skyscraper, it was a monument to arrogance. A spear of black glass and steel that pierced the storm clouds. The lobby was sterile, white marble and chrome, already crawling with uniforms and forensics techs who looked intimidated by the sheer wealth of the place. His partner, Detective Sarah Chin, met him by the private elevator. She was half his age, sharp as a tack, and looked like she hadn't slept in 2 days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and her eyes scanned everything. Detective Jensen, she greeted him, her voice clipped. Figured Miller would pull you in. He's sentimental, Art grumbled, pulling his collar tighter as the elevator doors whispered shut. What's the setup? The setup, Chen said, tapping her tablet, is impossible. Harrison Vance, 62. Lives alone. The penthouse is floors 50 and 51. It's a fortress. The elevator we're in, only one that goes this high, requires his fingerprint and a specific keycard, which was found on his person. No stairwell access from the outside. And the inside? Completely sealed. Windows are ballistic grade, permanently locked. Ventilation shafts are 6 inches wide. The front door is a 3-inch thick slab of reinforced steel, also biometrically sealed. According to the building's internal logs, which Nexus controls, that door hasn't been opened in 72 hours. And no one, has used this elevator except Vance in the last week. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse. Art Jensen had seen a lot of crime scenes. This was something else. It wasn't an apartment, it was a museum. Stark white walls, minimalist furniture, and a 2-story window overlooking the storm-lashed city. It was cold, sterile, and silent, except for the hum of the climate control. And in the center of the vast, white rug, lay Harrison Vance. He was dressed in expensive silk pajamas, lying on his back. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle. His eyes were wide open, fixed on the ceiling, his face a mask of placid surprise. Coroner's preliminary? Art asked, walking a slow circle around the body, his old shoes squeaking on the pristine floor. Not yet, Chen said, standing back. But look at this. No gunshot, no stab wound, no ligature marks. No visible contusions. He just stopped. But the patrolman who found him, sent by Vance's own internal security for a missed wellness check, said he found this. Chin pointed to the floor near the window. Art knelt, his knees cracking in protest. There, on the immaculate white carpet, miles from any soil, was a single fresh, muddy oak leaf. Art stared at it. The windows don't open. They don't, Chin confirmed. No one came through the door. No one came up the elevator. Correct. But someone, Art said, looking from the leaf to the dead billionaire, brought the outside in. He walked over to the body and looked closer. Vance's hands were clean, his feet bare. Art looked at the man's face. He looked peaceful, almost relieved. Where's the wellness check guard? Art asked. Downstairs. Scared stiff. He works for Nexus Security, not the building. Said he had to use a master override code from corporate just to get the elevator to move, and when he got up here, he found him exactly like this. He didn't touch anything. Swears it. Art walked to the massive window. The rain lashed against the glass 50 stories up. Below, the city was a grid of electric misery. A locked room. A body with no visible cause of death. And a clue, the leaf, that made 0 sense. This is a high-tech fortress, Chen, Art murmured, half to himself. Everything is logged, scanned, and recorded. The killer couldn't have gotten in. Unless, Chen offered, they never left. Or they weren't human. Art shot her a look. Let's stick to basics. No ghosts, no killer robots. Not yet. We're missing something obvious. He scanned the room again. The kitchen was spotless. The study was organized. The bedroom was untouched. It was the home of a man who didn't live. He just existed. If the door was locked from the inside, Art said, and the system logs show it hasn't been opened, that means Vance locked it himself. He was alive when the killer was here. Or the killer locked it after, Chin countered. But the biometrics are keyed only to Vance. The system wouldn't accept a dead man's print, and it's heat sensitive. So Vance was alive, locked his killer in with him, and then died peacefully? Art scoffed. Doesn't track. He knelt by the leaf again. It was dark green, edged with brown, and still damp. It was impossible. Check the security feed, Art ordered. I don't care what the logs say. I want the raw data from the elevator, the lobby, the service tunnels. Pull Vance's medicals. Pull his financials. Pull his enemies list. If he's Nexus, that list is probably the city phone book. On it, detective. Chin moved away, already speaking into her phone. Art Jensen stood alone with the body. He looked from the impossible leaf to the dead billionaire. This wasn't the simple, open and shut case he'd wanted to coast on for his last week. This was complicated. This was messy. It was a case designed to annoy him. He looked at Vance's strangely peaceful expression. So Harrison, Art muttered under his breath. You build a castle in the sky to keep the world out. But you forgot one thing. He leaned down, squinting at the body. You let the killer in yourself. Art stood up. The rain hammered the glass, a frantic drumming against the silence of the room. This case, he realized with a sinking feeling, wasn't just a puzzle box. It was a Pandora's box. And with 7 days left on the clock, he was the unlucky detective who'd just been handed the key. The basement of the 17th precinct smelled of bleach and cold steel. It was a sharp contrast to the ionized, sterile air of Vance's penthouse. Detective Art Jensen stood in the morgue, the fluorescent lights humming a low, mournful tune. On the table lay Harrison Vance, looking smaller and paler in death than his reputation suggested. Dr. Lena Ramirez, the city's chief medical examiner, pulled down her surgical mask. She looked tired, but her eyes were sharp. Arthur, you look worse than he does. 7 days left, huh? This is one hell of a parting gift. Just give me the news, Lena, Art said, rubbing his eyes. What killed the ghost? That's the million-dollar question. Or in his case, the $50 billion question. She tapped a stainless steel tray. No trauma, internal or external. No bruising, no petechiae, no signs of asphyxiation. His heart just stopped. Natural causes? Art asked, though he knew it was a lie. The leaf on the carpet wasn't natural. Not a chance, Lena said. His heart was in perfect condition. Healthier than mine. No, this was induced. Toxicology is running now, but my preliminary screen, it's clean. No cyanide, no opiates, no heavy metals. Nothing standard. So, What are you saying? He was scared to death. Lena paused, looking at Vance's peaceful face. That's the weird part. Whatever it was fast, and it wasn't violent. The body systems just switched off, like pulling a plug. If I had to guess, I'd say a complex, bespoke neurotoxin. Something that attacks the brainstem and shuts down autonomic functions instantly. Respiration, heartbeat, boom, done. Peaceful, Art murmured. Eerily so, she agreed. This wasn't a crime of passion, Art. This was an execution. Clean, precise, and sophisticated. Whoever did this is a professional. And rich. You don't buy this kind of poison at the corner store. It's designed. Engineered. Engineered, Art repeated. The word felt heavy. Thanks, Lena. Call me the instant toxicology finds a whisper of anything. Will do. Don't let the door hit you on the way to retirement. Art walked back up to the squad room. The storm had subsided to a relentless drizzle. Chen was at her desk, surrounded by monitors, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She looked up as he approached, her expression grim. You smell like formaldehyde, she said. And you look like you've been staring at the Matrix, Art retorted, slumping into his chair. What's the digital word? The digital word is impossible, Chen said, spinning a monitor toward him. I've reviewed the raw data logs from the Apex and from Nexus headquarters. The system is perfect. There are no gaps, no ghost data, no backdoors I can find. The elevator was not used. The door was not opened. The biometric sensors on the windows are all active and show no tampering. The guard, Art said. Frank Doyle. What's his story? Clean. Ex-military, 3 years with Nexus security. He got the automated wellness alert, tried to call Vance, got no answer. He was authorized to use a level 9 corporate override code, which is basically a digital skeleton key, to access the elevator. He went up, found the body, and immediately called 911. His body cam footage matches his report. He touched nothing but the phone. So the system is perfect, Art said, leaning back, his chair groaning in protest. The me says the murder was perfect. But they left a muddy leaf. Ah, the leaf, Chen said, pulling up another file. Forensics is having a field day. It's a Quercus rubra, a simple red oak. The mud is, well, mud. Common alluvial soil, high in clay. It matches soil found in pretty much every park in Ridley City. So, the killer took a stroll in the park, then, what? Teleported 50 stories up into a sealed room, administered a ghost poison, and vanished, leaving only a leaf. Chin sighed, turning off the monitor. When you say it like that, it sounds stupid. It is stupid, Art said. Which means we're stupid. We're looking at the tech. Vance lived in the tech. The killer used the tech. But the leaf is human. It's a mistake. It's the one thing that doesn't belong. We're focusing on the how, Chen. Let's focus on the why. Motive. Greed, Chen offered. He's Harrison Vance. His net worth rivals small countries. Who gets the money? Chen was already typing. That's the other wrinkle. According to his lawyer, whom I woke up an hour ago, Vance liquidated most of his Nexus stock 5 years ago. He poured it all into a charitable trust, the Vance Foundation for Urban Renewal. When he died, the rest of his estate, including the penthouse, rolls into the trust. He has no CEO position to inherit. He was just a figurehead, a myth. So he died, and a charity for parks gets the money, Art said. That's not a motive. Any family. One. An estranged sister, Eleanor Vance. She's an artist. Lives over in the old warehouse district. Hasn't spoken to him in 15 years. Let's go talk to her, Art said, grabbing his trench coat. I'm tired of computers. I need to talk to someone who hates him. The warehouse district was all brick, rust, and rain. Eleanor Vance's studio was a massive, drafty space on the top floor, smelling of turpentine and old wood. The place was the polar opposite of the Apex penthouse. It was cluttered, chaotic, and aggressively analog. Canvases were stacked everywhere, most of them dark, abstract, and angry. Eleanor Vance matched the room. She was in her late 50s, with wild gray hair streaked with paint, and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. She was cleaning brushes when they walked in, and didn't stop. Detectives, she said, her voice raspy. I told the other one on the phone. I haven't seen Harrison in 15 years. I don't care that he's dead. That's a cold take, Ms. Vance, Chen said. Is it? Eleanor scoffed, finally turning. My brother wasn't a person. He was an algorithm, a ghost in a machine of his own making. He disowned me when I refused to digitize my art, whatever that means. He thought the real world was messy. He hated it. He was a recluse, Art said, walking around the studio, looking at the paintings. He was a coward, she corrected. He built that sterile tower to hide from everything. From people. From dirt. From the air. He had allergies, obsessive. Afraid of germs. Afraid of reality. He thought if he could control the data, he could control life. I guess someone proved him wrong. Does this look familiar? Art asked, holding up a clear plastic evidence bag containing the single oak leaf. Eleanor squinted at it. It's a leaf. From an oak tree. We have them in the park down the street. So what? It was found in your brother's penthouse. On the carpet. Near his body. Eleanor Vance actually laughed. It was a dry, cracking sound. Oh, that's rich. That's beautiful. He spends his entire life building a fortress to keep the messy world out, and in the end, the world finds a way in. He would have hated that. Mud on his perfect white carpet. Where were you last night, Miss Vance? Chin asked, her voice hard. Right here, Eleanor said, gesturing to a massive, half-finished canvas. Working. I was at the Broken Glass Gallery show until midnight, then I came home and painted until dawn. My neighbors can vouch. The gallery owner can vouch. I don't need an alibi, detective. I didn't kill Harrison. The world did. He just finally let it in. They left the studio and stood on the wet sidewalk, the city's old buildings looming over them. She's a dead end, Chin said, frustrated. She hated him, but she has an alibi, and she gains nothing. We're back to square one. A locked room, a ghost poison, and a leaf from any park in the city. Art Jensen stared up at the gray, leaking sky. He thought about the sterile penthouse and the high-tech locks. He thought about the man who was terrified of germs and dirt. She said he was afraid of the real world, Art murmured. But that leaf, Chin. That leaf was as real as it gets. It was wet. It was muddy. It wasn't an accident. So what does it mean? Art looked at his partner, the beginnings of a new, unsettling idea forming in his mind. It means the killer knew him. They knew exactly what he was afraid of. This wasn't just an execution. It was a message. He started walking toward the car. Where are we going? Chin asked. Back to the apex, Art said. We've been looking at the security system as a fortress to keep people out. It's time to start looking at it as a weapon to let someone in. We're not looking for a ghost, Chin. We're looking for the person Harrison Vance trusted enough to give them the keys. The Nexus corporate offices occupied 10 floors below Harrison Vance's penthouse. If the penthouse was a sterile museum, the offices were a sterile, humming beehive. Glass walls, whisper-quiet employees in charcoal gray suits, and the omnipresent, faint scent of ozone. It was a place that ran on data and filtered air. Art Jensen and Sarah Chen were escorted into a corner office that belonged to Julian Thorne, Vance's chief of staff. Thorne was the polar opposite of Eleanor Vance's chaotic energy. He was in his late 40s, with a razor-sharp part in his dark hair, an impeccable suit, and a calm, almost placid demeanor. He looked like a man who ironed his socks. Detectives, Thorne said, rising and gesturing to two minimalist chairs. His voice was smooth, modulated. A terrible, terrible tragedy. Mr. Vance, he was a visionary. This city will feel his loss. We're sure it will, Art grumbled, ignoring the chair. He preferred to stand. It made people nervous. Mr. Thorne, you were Mr. Vance's chief of staff. That means you were his gatekeeper. I managed his schedule and his corporate interests, yes. Gatekeeper implies he ever wanted to go out or let anyone in. He did not. His privacy was his one, true obsession. We're here about access, Chin said, cutting to the chase, her tablet already in hand. The penthouse is a biometric fortress keyed only to Vance. We know that. But there are overrides. The Level 9 corporate code, for instance. The one security guard Doyle used. Thorne steepled his fingers, his expression unchanged. The Level 9 override is a fail-safe, detective. It exists for emergencies. Fire. Medical incapacitation. Like this one. Who has it? Art asked. As chief of staff, I do. The head of Nexus Security, Ms. Albright, also has it. And the 3 members of the executive board have a 2-part key system that can generate 1. All access is logged, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. You have those logs. No one used the code until Officer Doyle. So you say, Art said, walking over to Thorne's window. It had the same view as the penthouse, just 10 floors lower. What about other access? Friends, family, lovers? Thorne almost smiled. Mr. Vance didn't have friends, Detective Jensen. He had employees. He had contacts. And he certainly didn't have lovers. His sister, Eleanor, I'm sure you've met. They haven't spoken since the 90s. He was, for all intents and purposes, alone. By choice. We found something in the room, Mr. Thorne, Art said, turning back. Something that didn't belong. A muddy oak leaf. For the first time, Thorne's composure wavered. He didn't blink, but his focus sharpened. A leaf. Soil. You sound surprised, Chin noted. I am, Thorne said, recovering. Mr. Vance was particular. He was a severe misophobe. Germs, dirt, contaminants. The penthouse filtration system is rated higher than a surgical clean room. He never went outside. He hated the outdoors. The idea of soil, mud, in his private space. Thorne shook his head. He would have considered it a profound violation. That's what his sister said, Art mused. But this leaf, a red oak, was there. Right by the body. What does red oak mean to you? Thorne frowned. It's a tree. I don't understand the question. Was Mr. Vance working on anything new? Chin asked, changing tactics. Anything that might have agitated him? Made him an enemy? Thorne hesitated. He hadn't been involved in day-to-day Nexus operations for years. But, recently, yes. He'd become nostalgic. He asked me to pull files from the archives. Something from before Nexus even existed. What was it? Art asked. A passion project. From the late 80s, I believe. It was called Project Redwood. Art and Chen exchanged a glance. Red Oak. Redwood. Project Redwood, Art repeated. What was it? It was a failure by his standards, Thorne said, tapping his desk console. A holographic schematic of a building flickered to life. It looked like a biosphere, a building intertwined with massive trees. His original dream. Before he built Nexus, before he built the Apex, he wanted to merge technology with nature, create living buildings that breathed. He wanted to bring the forest into the city. That doesn't sound like a man who hated the outdoors, Chin observed. This was a different Harrison Vance, Thorne said quietly. Before the phobias took over. Before he became a recluse. The project was a spectacular failure. Too expensive, the tech wasn't ready. The investors pulled out. He lost everything. He built Nexus from the ashes of that failure. He never spoke of it again, until last month. Who else knew about Project Redwood? Art asked. The original investors, perhaps? Most are dead. The architects. It was a lifetime ago. He was secretive about it. He seemed almost ashamed of it, of the optimism. We'll need those files, Chin said. All of them. Of course. Thorne's cooperation was perfect. Almost too perfect. One last thing, Art said, his eyes scanning the immaculate, minimalist office. You said he was alone. But you worked with him for, how long? 25 years. I was his first hire at Nexus. So you knew him before he was a ghost. You knew the man who wanted to build Project Redwood. I knew the visionary, yes. And I saw what the world did to him. It made him build walls. I simply helped maintain them. Is that all, detectives? For now, Art said. They walked out of the office and stood by the elevator, the silence of the corporate floor pressing in on them. So, Chin said, keeping her voice low. Vance wasn't always a germaphobe. He used to be a tree hugger, and his chief of staff, who has override access, just happens to be the gatekeeper to that old project. A project with a tree name. Just like our leaf. Thorne is too smooth, Art said. He's a closed loop. He gave us just enough to seem helpful. Do you think he did it? I think he's a man who has spent 25 years cleaning up Harrison Vance's messes. Maybe he just got tired of it. But how? How does a man in a perfect suit get a muddy leaf into a sealed room and commit a perfect murder? The elevator doors whispered open. As they stepped in, Chin paused. Art. Look. Art turned. Chin was looking back at Thorne's office. The glass walls were smart glass, opaque from the outside. But the wall next to his door was clear, displaying corporate art. Except, tucked in the corner, almost hidden, was a small, old-fashioned, framed photograph. Chin stepped out of the elevator and walked over to it. Art followed. It wasn't corporate art. It was a personal photo. In it, a much younger Julian Thorne and a much younger, smiling Harrison Vance stood side by side. They were wearing hiking gear. They were in a forest, their arms slung over each other's shoulders, beaming at the camera. Behind them, massive and unmistakable, was a giant, ancient red oak tree. He didn't just know about Project Redwood, Chin whispered. He was there. Art stared at the photo. The smiling, vibrant man in the picture was a ghost, and the man who stood beside him was now the prime suspect in his murder. Thorne lied, Art said, his voice flat. He didn't just know Vance. He knew him when he still touched the dirt. And that, he said, tapping the glass of the photo, is exactly what got him killed. Julian Thorne's office was exactly as they had left it, still, silent, and cold. Thorne was standing by the window, looking down at the city, a tablet in his hand. He didn't seem surprised to see them return so quickly. He simply turned, his placid mask firmly in place. Detectives, did you forget something? Art Jensen didn't bother with pleasantries. He held up his phone, displaying the digital copy Chen had taken of the photograph. The image of the two young, smiling men in the forest. We forgot to ask about Harry, Art said, his voice a low gravel. And we forgot to ask about this. Thorne's eyes locked on the image. The silence in the room stretched, thick and heavy. The only sound was the faint, electric hum of the building. Thorne's professional calm didn't break, but it calcified. It became a hard, defensive shell. He walked slowly back to his desk and sat down, gesturing for them to do the same. This time, Art took the chair. I see, Thorne said, his voice losing its modulated smoothness. It was colder now. You've been thorough. Yes. That was Harrison. Before he became Vance. And that was me before, well before this. You lied, Chin stated, her voice sharp. You said he had no friends, only employees. You've been his employee for 25 years, but you were his friend for longer. A lie of omission, detective, Thorne replied, his gaze distant. The man in that photograph died 30 years ago. He was replaced by the recluse you found in the penthouse. I was his friend. What I became was his custodian, his warden. I managed the fortress he built around himself. The fortress, Art said, leaning forward. Let's talk about that. And let's talk about this. He pointed to the picture. The red oak. Just like the leaf we found on his carpet. Thorne finally broke eye contact, looking down at his own manicured hands. The monarch, he said quietly. That's what we called it. It was a 300-year-old red oak on the land we bought for Project Redwood. It was the centerpiece. The heart of the project. Harrison, he used to say it was the perfect integration. A living thing, more complex than any machine we could ever build. So, Project Redwood wasn't just a failure, Chin surmised. It was a dream. His dream. It was our dream, Thorne corrected, a flicker of genuine emotion, anger, regret, in his eyes. We were going to change the world. We weren't just building smart homes. We were building living homes. Buildings that breathed, recycled water, grew their own food, all integrated around a natural core. We were three young men who thought we could build paradise. 3. Art pounced on the word. There was a third. Thorne sighed. He looked for the first time, like a man weighed down by something. This is why I didn't want to bring this up. It's ancient history. It's a wound that's scarred over. The man in the penthouse just died from a ghost poison, and the killer left a leaf from that ancient history on the floor. The wound just reopened, Art said. Who was the third man? Thorne tapped his console. An old file appeared on the wall-mounted screen. It was another photo. This one showed the same young Vance and Thorne, but standing between them was a third man, wild-eyed and grinning, with untamed dark hair. He had his arms around both of them. Michael Sullivan, Thorne said. Mike. He was the genius. Harry was the visionary, I was the logistics, but Mike was the magic. He was the bioengineer. He was the one who was actually designing the neural interface between the building and the landscape. He could make plants respond to code. He was brilliant and unstable. What happened? Chin asked, already typing Sullivan's name into her tablet. The investors pulled out, Thorne said. The tech was too new, the cost was astronomical. They got cold feet. Harry panicked. He saw his reputation crumbling. He folded. He wanted to scrap it all, declare bankruptcy, and start over. I agreed with him. It was the only logical move. We had to cut our losses. And Sullivan? Art watched Thorne's face. Mike saw it as the ultimate betrayal. Not just of the company, but of the dream. Of the monarch. He accused us of selling our souls for balance sheets. He had a breakdown. A bad one. He confronted Harry. It was violent. He said Harry was a coward for hiding behind dead technology, and that one day, he'd remind him what real, living things could do. He meant the forest. He meant the monarch. Where is he now? Chin asked, looking up from her screen. There's no digital footprint for a Michael Sullivan matching that description for the last 20 years. No license, no credit, no taxes. Exactly, Thorne said. He vanished. He went completely off the grid. He hated what Nexus became. He called it the Great Sterilization. He believed in soil, in germs, in chaos. He was the living embodiment of everything Harrison came to fear. A man who hates the digital world. A bioengineer who specializes in living systems. A man with a 30-year-old grudge and a flair for the dramatic. A man like that, Art said, thinking aloud, could probably design a poison. Something natural, something from a plant, something that leaves no trace. Something that mimics a natural shutdown, Thorne agreed, nodding. As I said, Mike was a genius. He saw biology as just another form of code. A code he could write. But the locked room, Chin challenged. Sullivan hates tech. How does he bypass the most advanced security system in the world? A system you helped maintain. You're thinking like a hacker, Thorne said. You're thinking of digital backdoors. Mike wouldn't use the front door. He wouldn't use the elevator. He wouldn't even think like that. He'd find another way. A natural way. Art and Chin stood up. They had their suspect. Why didn't you tell us this from the start, Mr. Thorne? Art asked, his eyes narrow. Because, Thorne said, standing as well, his smooth composure returning. I am the chief of staff of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Sullivan is a ghost story, a madman who disappeared 2 decades ago. I gave you the logical facts. I didn't want to muddy the waters with nostalgia. It seemed irrelevant. Until you found the leaf. It's always the leaf, Art said. They walked out of the office, leaving Thorne standing in the cold blue light of his monitors. The elevator ride down was silent. Finally, as the doors opened to the marble lobby, Chen spoke. He served up Sullivan on a silver platter, complete with motive, means, and backstory. It's almost too neat. Of course it's too neat, Art grumbled, pushing his way through the lobby doors into the damp afternoon air. Thorne's been lying to us since we walked in. He used that story to point us directly at Sullivan. But that doesn't mean he's wrong. A man can tell a truth to hide a bigger lie. So we have 2 suspects, Chin said. The smooth executive who has the keys to the kingdom and lied about his past. And the ghost in the woods who hated the victim and knows how to build a ghost poison. Yeah, Art said, pulling up his collar. The drizzle had started again. This case is getting crowded. I was hoping to be doing paperwork right now. Where to first? Chin asked. Sullivan is a ghost. We can't find him digitally. But Thorne is right here. And he just gave us the name of the project that started it all. Project Redwood. Let's find out what's left of it. Let's go find that tree. Project Redwood was not on any current map of Ridley City. The site was an hour's drive east, deep in the county's overgrown conservation land. The only thing marking the entrance was a rotted, fallen sign that once read, Vance Properties, and a chain-link fence that had long since surrendered to rust and ivy. Art Jensen used a pair of bolt cutters from his trunk to snap the ancient lock. The sound was loud and metallic in the oppressive quiet of the woods. After you, he said to Chen. The air here was thick, heavy with the smell of damp earth, decaying leaves, and pine. It was the complete antithesis of the Apex Tower. There, everything was filtered and sterile. Here, everything was alive and rotting. According to the county records Thorne sent, Chen said, navigating with her tablet, the main site should be another half-mile in. This was supposed to be a service road. The road was little more than a muddy track, swallowed by ferns and shadowed by a dense canopy. They walked in silence, the only sound the squelch of their shoes in the mud and the distant caw of a crow. After 10 minutes, the forest opened into a clearing, and they saw it. It was a skeleton. The living building, from Thorne's schematic, was a rusted-out husk of steel girders, looking like the ribcage of a long-dead leviathan. Nature hadn't just reclaimed it, it had devoured it. Massive vines strangled the steel. Trees grew up through the concrete foundation. It was a monument to failure, a perfect symbol of Harrison Vance's abandoned dream. "So much for the future," Art muttered, stepping over a fallen beam. "Art." "The monarch," Chen said, pointing. It stood on a small rise at the far end of the clearing, untouched by the decay of the building. The red oak was magnificent. It was ancient, its trunk wider than a car, its branches spreading like a cathedral ceiling. It was a silent, powerful giant that predated the city itself. They approached it slowly. The ground around its base was clear, as if kept tidy by some unseen hand. "He hated the outdoors," Art said, thinking of Vance. "But he started here. What makes a man trade this for a glass box in the sky?" "Fear," Chen said, her eyes scanning the base of the tree. "Thorne said it himself. He got scared. He ran back to what he could control." She stopped. "Art, look." At the base of the tree, tucked between two massive, exposed roots, was a camouflaged canvas flap. It was covered in moss and branches, almost perfectly hidden. It was a door. Art drew his service weapon. Chen mirrored him. He nodded, then reached down and ripped the canvas away. It revealed a dark opening, a dugout, a burrow, dug into the earth beneath the roots of the great tree. A faint smell of wood smoke and something chemical wafted out. "Police!" Art yelled into the darkness. "Show yourself!" Only silence answered. With his flashlight cutting a beam into the gloom, Art descended the 3 crude steps. Chen was right behind him. It was a shelter, but it was more than that. It was a home, and a laboratory. A sleeping bag was rolled neatly in one corner. Canned goods were stacked on a makeshift shelf. In the center was a heavy wooden table. On it, lit by a battery-powered lantern, was a life's work. Dozens of notebooks were piled high, their pages filled with manic, sprawling handwriting. Some were rants, pages and pages of vitriol directed at Harry and Julian. Accusations of betrayal. Curses against the sterile sickness of Nexus. But other notebooks were precise. They were filled with complex botanical diagrams, notes on fungal chains and root systems, and detailed, horrifyingly meticulous research on neurotoxins derived from mushrooms and plant spores. Chen picked up one notebook, her gloved fingers turning the page. Mycotoxins, targeted nerve agent delivery, inhalation-based paralysis. "Art, this is it." Lena was wrong. It wasn't an injection. It was airborne. Something he breathed in. He was a bioengineer, Art said, his flashlight beam landing on a row of sealed glass jars. They were filled with dark soil, each one growing a different, sickly-looking fungus. He weaponized his own field. Then Chen saw another bag. A plastic freezer bag, half full, sitting by the entrance. It was filled with dark, wet, clay-heavy mud. "The mud," she whispered. "It matches. This is where the leaf came from." Sullivan, he was here. Then he went to the penthouse. "But how, Chen?" Art argued. "This place is an hour from the city. He has no digital footprint. He's not taking the bus. And he's not flying." His flashlight beam continued to scan the room. It passed over the sleeping bag, the food stores, and landed on a set of maps. They weren't road maps. They were old, brittle. They were schematics of the Ridley City underground. The old, forgotten service tunnels. The storm drains. The steam conduits from the 1920s that ran directly beneath the downtown core. "My God," Chen said, understanding. "He's not off-grid in the woods. He's off-grid in the tunnels. He lives under the city. A ghost. A man made of mud and roots, living right under their feet." Art looked at the tunnel map, then at the poison, then at the mud. "He's a ghost," he agreed. "And he's been planning this for 30 years. He was about to turn to call it in when his light caught one more thing. It was hanging from a nail above the table. A simple, cheap paper calendar. Each day of the past month was crossed out with a thick, black X. Today's date, October 27th, was circled in red. But it wasn't the X's that made Art's blood run cold. It was the 2 entries, written in the same neat, manic script as the notebooks. The entry for yesterday read, Harrison Vance. That name was already crossed out. Beneath it, on the line for today's date, was a single, fresh entry. It hadn't been crossed out yet. It read, Julian Thorne. Art and Chen stared at it. The realization hit them both at the same time. Thorne wasn't lying, Chen said, her voice tight. He wasn't pointing us to Sullivan to frame him. He was pointing us to Sullivan because he's terrified, Art finished, already moving, scrambling up the steps into the daylight. He knew he was next. He sent us out here to find this, to prove Sullivan was real. He sent us out here to save his life, Chen said, right behind him, her phone already to her ear. Chen to dispatch. I need a wellness check, priority 1, at the Apex building, 49th floor, office of Julian Thorne. Possible 10 to 56. Send uniforms. Now. Art was already running, crashing through the underbrush toward the car. An hour. They were an hour away. He's not the killer, Art, Chen yelled, running behind him. He's the next victim. And we're the only alibi he's got, Art grunted, shoving a branch out of his face. Which is exactly what Sullivan is counting on. The drive back to Ridley City was a frantic blur of rain and screaming tires. Art Jensen pushed the unmarked sedan to its limit, the old engine whining in protest. The city skyline, a wall of light against the bruised purple dusk, seemed impossibly far. I have 2 patrol cars at the Apex lobby, Chen said from the passenger seat, her voice tight, the phone pressed hard against her ear. The building supervisor is fighting them on access. He won't authorize a security override without a warrant. To hell with a warrant, Art growled, swerving around a slow-moving truck. Tell them to hold that supervisor. Tell them if he delays them 1 more second, I'll charge him with obstruction in a capital murder case. We don't have time for protocol. Chen relayed the message, her voice pure ice. They're moving, Art. But the 49th floor internal security it's offline. The whole floor's gone dark. No cameras, no sensors. Sullivan, Art said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He's not just a biochemist. He's inside the building's nervous system. He cut the floor off. He used the tunnels, Chen said, thinking aloud, her fingers flying on her tablet. I'm cross-referencing the Apex blueprints with the city utility map Sullivan had. They connect. The old 1920s steam tunnels. They were capped off when the Apex was built, but one main conduit runs directly beneath the building's central core. If he found a way to breach the foundation. He didn't breach it, Art said, the terrible logic falling into place. He used it. He's been planning this for 30 years. He probably helped build a way in, disguised as an old utility shaft. He's been waiting. They screeched to a halt in front of the Apex, abandoning the car in the no-stopping zone. The lobby was no longer the calm, sterile vestibule from before. 2 uniforms had the building supervisor, a man in a crisp suit, pinned against a marble pillar, and he was shouting about lawsuits. Detective Jensen, 17th, Art barked, flashing his badge. Where's the elevator? It's not responding, sir, one of the uniforms yelled. The whole system's on lockdown. Fire controls, everything. Nothing's moving. The stairs, Chen ordered. Where are the emergency stairs? We're going to the 49th floor? The young uniform asked, his eyes wide. You're not. We are, Art said. He and Chen found the stairwell door and burst through it. The climb was brutal. 49 flights of concrete and steel. They didn't run, they consumed the distance, a steady pounding rhythm, their breathing echoing in the narrow shaft. Art's knees screamed, and his lungs burned. He was too old for this. 7 days. He just had to last 7 more days. They burst out onto the 49th floor. The silence was immediate and terrifying. The corporate beehive was still. The lights were on, but the ubiquitous hum of servers and screens was gone. It was dead. Julian Thorne's office, Chen panted, pointing. This way. They rounded the corner and stopped. Thorne's office was at the end of the hall. The smart glass walls, usually transparent, were now opaque, a milky, lifeless white. He's locked it down, Chen said, approaching the door panel. The system is fried. The keypad is dead. She tried her own override code. Nothing. It's a brick. Stand back, Art ordered. He unholstered his weapon. You can't shoot that, Chen said. It's 3-inch ballistic glass. I'm not aiming for the glass. Art fired 3 shots into the digital lock mechanism beside the door. Sparks flew, and the panel smoked, but the door remained sealed. Damn it! Steel frame. It's a vault. The maintenance, Chen said, suddenly looking up. The vent art in the ceiling. She pointed to an access panel in the drywall ceiling, 10 feet from Thorne's door. It was a utility crawl space. Art dragged a heavy minimalist planter over, climbed on it, and pushed the panel aside. I'll go, Chen said. I'm smaller. No. I'll go, Art grunted. You cover the hull. He pulled himself up into the darkness, the smell of dust and ozone hitting him. He crawled on his hands and knees, his flashlight beam cutting the blackness. The crawl space ran over the glass-walled offices. He moved, scraping his way along, until his light shined down through a gap. He was directly over Thorne's office. And the office was not empty. He didn't just see it. He smelled it. The rich, heavy, unmistakable scent of damp earth. The sterile, minimalist office was destroyed. It was filled with mud. Dozens of bags had been ripped open. Soil was piled on the expensive desk, smeared on the monitors, and shoveled into a heap on the floor. It was a desecration. It was a violation. And in the center of it all, sitting upright in his high-backed leather chair, was Julian Thorne. He was just like Vance. His eyes were open, fixed on the doorway. His face was placid, almost bored. But this time, there was no subtlety. A massive gaping ventilation grate, easily 3 feet wide, was open on the far wall, a dark square leading into the building's core. Muddy footprints led from it, circled the desk, and led back. Sullivan had brought the forest, the dirt, to the man who lived in the sterile air. He had forced him to breathe it in. Chen! Art yelled, his voice muffled. He's in the chair. He's gone. The killer came through the main air duct. He's back in the tunnels. Art dropped back down into the hallway, landing hard. Chen was already on her phone, calling into me, calling for a tactical team to seal the basement levels. Art walked to the glass door. Now that the power was completely dead, the smart glass was slowly, very slowly, losing its opaqueness, becoming translucent. He could just make out the dark shape of the chair, the impossible piles of mud. He's making a statement, Chen said, joining him, her voice low. Vance got a leaf. Thorne got the whole forest. He's escalating. He's angry, Art said. He looked at the door. Chen, your phone. Light. She shined her phone's flashlight at the desk, through the now fading glass. They could see Thorne's silhouette. They could see the mud. And half hidden under a pile of wet soil on the desk was a small black object. Is that? Chen zoomed in with her phone's camera. A digital audio recorder, Art said. A tiny red light was blinking. Faintly. Steadily. It's still on. Thorne, that magnificent bastard. He knew he was dead. He couldn't call for help. He couldn't get out. So he hit record. Art looked from the dead man in the chair to the dark, gaping maw of the ventilation shaft. They hadn't saved Thorne. But Thorne, the man of logic and data, had just left them a message. Sullivan's not just a ghost, Art said, a new, cold energy rising in him. He's a storyteller. And Julian Thorne just recorded the whole story. Time stopped. In the dead quiet hallway of the 49th floor, Art Jensen and Sarah Chen stared at the small, blinking red light through the translucent glass. They had the killer's name. They had the motive. And now, they had a witness. We can't wait for forensics, Art said, his voice hard. We need that recorder. The door is a magnetic lock vault, Art, Chen said, running her hand along the sealed frame. Shooting the lock just fused it. We need the fire department. We need a Halligan. We need the jaws of life. Then get them, Art snapped, his frustration palpable. Tell dispatch to send the heavy rescue unit. Tell them it's a critical evidence retrieval in an active homicide. Go. Chen was already on the radio. Art was left alone in the hallway, staring at the blurred silhouette of Julian Thorne, a man who had been dead for at least an hour, yet was still, somehow, talking to them. He thought about the climb up those 49 flights. He thought about his 7 remaining days. This wasn't how retirement was supposed to start. It took 20 minutes. 20 agonizing minutes where Art and Chen stood guard, keeping the arriving patrol officers back, clearing the floor. The heavy rescue team arrived, sweating and carrying axes, pry bars, and a heavy hydraulic spreader. You want it fast or you want it clean, detective? The fire captain asked. I want it open, Art said. It wasn't clean. It was a brutal assault of screeching metal and cracking hydraulics. The jaws of life bit into the steel frame, and with a groan that seemed to shake the building, the vault door burst open. The smell hit them first. It wasn't the smell of death. It was the smell of earth. Rich, loamy, wet soil. The smell of a forest floor after a hard rain. It was thick, overpowering, and absolutely, profoundly wrong in this sterile environment. The room was a desecration. Julian Thorne's pristine, minimalist office was a muddy swamp. Soil was smeared on the glass walls. The expensive wool carpet was churned into mud. The keyboard was caked in it. And in the center, Julian Thorne sat, perfectly composed, his eyes open, as if he were patiently waiting for a meeting to begin. The massive ventilation grate on the far wall gaped open like a dark, square mouth. Muddy, bare footprints led from it, circled the desk, and returned. "My God," Chin whispered, stepping in, her own feet sinking slightly into the mud. He brought the whole woods up here. Forensics began their grim work, but Chin moved with purpose. She navigated the mud to the desk, her flashlight zeroed in on the audio recorder. It was half buried, its small red light blinking steadily. Blink, blink, blink. "Bagging critical evidence," she announced, her gloved hand carefully lifting the device. She sealed it in an evidence bag. They didn't wait. They didn't go back downstairs to the mobile command center. Art pointed to the emergency stairwell. "In there. Now." They stepped into the concrete shaft, the heavy door slamming shut, muffling the chaos from the office. It was just the two of them, the smell of mud and ozone still clinging to their clothes. Chin took the recorder out of the bag. Her hands were steady. She pressed play. The audio was clear. It began with the sound of a chair creaking. Then, Julian Thorne's voice. "Calm. Resigned. The level 9 override is sealed. The comms are dead. Very thorough, Mike. You were always thorough. You're in the vents, aren't you?" There was a long silence. Then, a new sound. A faint, aerosol hissing. Art and Chin exchanged a look. "The poison. Hello, Julian." The voice was not Thorne's. It was rougher, deeper, and it echoed slightly, as if coming from the ventilation system itself. It was the voice of Michael Sullivan, the ghost. "Do you smell that?" Sullivan's voice continued, filled with a strange, righteous calm. "It's the real world. It's the monarch. The earth you and Harry decided to pave over. You traded it for this tomb, this sterile box." Thorne's voice came next, but it was strained. He was coughing, a wet, shallow sound. "You killed Harry." "Harry died 30 years ago," Sullivan's voice boomed, suddenly full of rage. "The day he chose steel over soil. The day he signed the papers and bulldozed our dream. You both chose your dead, gray technology. You built this monument to your fear. This skyscraper, 50 stories high, breathing filtered, dead air. You forgot one thing, Julian." A long, gasping breath from Thorne. "What?" "All buildings have to breathe. And I've spent 30 years living in the lungs of this city. In the tunnels. In the darkness. I've been cultivating. I've been writing a new code. A biological code. The spores." Thorne whispered. "Exactly," Sullivan said. The sound of hissing grew louder. "This isn't just for you. This isn't just for Harry. This is for the building. This is the inoculation. You two were just the symbolic gesture. You were the problem, but this building is the disease. It's the great sterilization." Thorne didn't speak again. There was only the sound of his labored, fading breath, and then silence. The recording didn't end. After a full minute of silence, Sullivan spoke one last time. His voice was no longer angry. It was serene, almost happy. "It's time, Julian. The spores are in the main ventilation hub. The system is set to purge. Tonight, at midnight, the apex doesn't just fall. It breathes. It gets messy. The monarch will finally breathe again. Inside." The recording clicked off. Chen and Art stared at each other in the dim light of the stairwell. The implications crashed down on them. "He's not a killer," Chen said, her voice shaking. "He's a bioterrorist." "He's going to release the toxin," Art said, his mind racing. "The same poison that killed Vance and Thorne. He's going to pump it into the entire building's air supply. There are thousands of people in this tower. Residences, offices, the hotel." He looked at his watch. It was 7:15 p.m. "Midnight," Art said, his voice flat and cold. "We have less than 5 hours to stop a ghost who controls the building's lungs." He pushed open the stairwell door and grabbed his radio. "This is Detective Jensen. I want the captain. I want SWAT. I want the CDC. Get me the building plans for the main HVAC system. We are evacuating the apex. Now. The stairwell door slammed open, and Art Jensen hit the 49th floor, landing like a man possessed. The organized chaos of the forensics team was already being swallowed by a new, more frantic energy. What is it, detective? The SWAT leader, a man named Keegan with RT, Rapid Tactical, stenciled on his helmet, demanded. This just went from a double homicide to a mass casualty event, Art barked, not bothering with names. The killer's name is Michael Sullivan. He's a bioterrorist. He's wired the main HVAC system to release the same toxin that killed Thorne. He's purging the building. Keegan's eyes, the only part of his face visible, hardened. When? Midnight, Chen said, joining them, her voice cutting through the tension. We have 4 hours and 41 minutes. We need a building-wide evacuation. Now. My team is still clearing the residential floors, Keegan said. A full evac. Do it, Art roared. Pull every fire alarm in this building. I want this tower empty, and I want the CDC and a hazmat alpha team on site yesterday. The effect was instantaneous. Keegan spoke into his comms, and seconds later, the world dissolved into noise. The high, piercing shriek of the fire alarms echoed from the core. Emergency strobes flashed, painting the muddy, desecrated office in frantic beats of red light. They took the tactical elevator down. The descent was a jarring contrast to the 49th floor climb. When the doors opened onto the lobby, it was no longer a sterile, marble sanctuary. It was a command post at the end of the world. Uniforms were everywhere, herding floods of confused and angry residents in bathrobes and hotel guests in evening wear toward the exits. The rain outside was still falling, and the night was alive with the approaching wail of dozens of sirens. Captain Miller, his face a grim mask, met them by the security console. Jensen, what the hell did you find? We found the motive, Captain, Art said, handing him the audio recorder. The killer, Sullivan, is planning to gas the entire building. He's in the basement, in the HVAC hub. He's been living in the tunnels under this place for decades. Miller's blood drained. He looked at the chaos, the river of people. How many? A new man stepped forward, a slim, terrified man in a building supervisor's uniform, his name tag reading Henderson. At this hour, full occupancy in the hotel, maybe 60% in the residences. 2, maybe 3,000 people. Sir, the HVAC, it's a closed-loop system. If something is in there, it goes everywhere. Then we turn it off. Miller yelled. Henderson was shaking his head, his face pale. We can't. That's what I've been trying to tell the officers. The whole system, it's offline. I'm locked out. The hard overrides in the security office aren't responding. He's not just in the hub, sir. He's controlling it. From the inside. The SWAT team, now fully assembled, was unrolling blueprints of the lower levels onto a marble table. Here, Keegan said, tapping a section. Sub-level 3. The main ventilation hub. It's a reinforced concrete bunker, built to withstand a fire. One access point, a reinforced steel door, just like the penthouses. We can breach it. No, Chen said, her eyes scanning the blueprints. Don't you see? It's a trap. All eyes turned to her. Sullivan's been planning this for 30 years, she said, her voice gaining speed. He's not a soldier. He's a zealot. He's a guerrilla. He's expecting a full frontal assault. The second he hears your breaching charge, he'll hit the purge button. He doesn't care if he dies, as long as he takes the building with him. So what do we do, detective? Keegan challenged. We wait. No, Art said. He was looking at the city utility maps they'd taken from Sullivan's burrow, now spread next to the apex blueprints. He tapped the spot where the old red lines of the 1920 steam tunnels met the new, blue lines of the apex foundation. He's not just in the hub, Art said, echoing Chin. He's in the walls. He's in the tunnels. That's his home. He's got a dozen escape routes. He wants us to make noise at the front door. Art looked at Keegan. You'll give him what he wants. You'll take your team, and you will make a slow, loud, very obvious show of setting up to breach that hub door. You'll be the distraction. Keegan nodded, catching on. And you. Art looked at Chen, then back at the map. He pointed to a small, forgotten utility access grate on the blueprint, 300 yards away from the main hub, hidden in a service corridor that connected to the old steam tunnel conduit. Chen and I, we're not going in as cops. We're going in as ghosts. We go in the back door, the same way he's been doing it. We use his own tunnels against him. A man in a full, bright yellow hazmat suit approached, his voice metallic through the speaker. Detectives. I'm Dr. Evans, CDC. The toxin we're dealing with, it's a complex fungal neurotoxin. Airborne. Inhalation. We have no field antidote. Our models show a 98% fatality rate within 5 minutes of exposure. You can't go in there without a level A suit and a rebreather. Art looked at the bulky, clumsy suits the hazmat team was wearing. Then he looked at the narrow, dark opening on the map. We can't hunt him in those, Art said. We'll be too slow. It's suicide, Detective, Evans protested. No, Chin said. The hub is a sealed system. He's staging the toxin there. It's not in the tunnels yet. Not until he hits the purge. The tunnels are still clean. You're betting your life on that, Evans said. Art looked at his watch. 8:05 p.m. Less than 4 hours. It's the only bet we've got, Art said. He grabbed a tactical flashlight from a SWAT bag and a standard-issue gas mask. It wouldn't stop the spores, but it felt better than nothing. Chin, you ready? She nodded, securing her own mask to her belt. She looked terrified, but her resolve was steel. Captain, Art said to Miller, keep this evacuation moving, and tell Keegan to make a lot of noise. We go in 5. Art Jensen, 7 days from his pension, turned away from the light and chaos of the lobby. He and Chen walked toward the basement stairwell, a door that led down, away from the air, into the concrete and dirt guts of the building. They were going down into Michael Sullivan's world. The door to the sub-basement stairwell was heavy steel, painted a dull, industrial gray. When Art Jensen pulled it shut, the world changed. The high-pitched scream of the fire alarms and the shouting from the lobby were instantly muffled, replaced by the low, deep thrum of the building's vital machinery. It was the sound of a sleeping giant's heartbeat. They were in sub-level 3, a cavernous space of unfinished concrete and exposed pipes. The air was cool and smelled of ozone and machine oil. Their footsteps echoed. This way, Chin said, her flashlight beam dancing ahead. Her tablet was in her other hand, displaying the Apex blueprints overlaid with the old city schematics. The utility corridor should be just past this transformer bank. They moved past massive, humming generators, all of them silent. The building's emergency power had kicked in, but Sullivan, it seemed, controlled that too. Only the essential lights, dim, caged emergency bulbs, cast long, weak shadows. Art felt the pressure in his knees. He'd climbed 49 flights, then run back down. His body was a catalog of old aches. But the cold, focused adrenaline in his gut was new. It was a feeling he hadn't had in years. Here, Chin said, stopping. She pointed her light at a section of blank concrete wall. The blueprint says there's a panel here, capped in 1995 when they built the foundation. Art ran his hand along the wall. It's not a panel. It's hollow. He knocked. The sound was a dull, empty thunk. He pushed, and a 3x3 section of the wall, cleverly disguised as solid concrete, but actually a prefab panel on hinges, swung inward with a faint, dusty groan. The smell that hit them was immediate and primal. It was the smell from Sullivan's burrow. Damp earth, rust, and the faint, sweet, sickly scent of fungus. His front door, Art muttered. He unclipped the gas mask from his belt, holding it ready. Masks on. We don't know what the air is like. They pulled the simple masks over their faces. The rubber seal felt flimsy, useless against a weaponized spore, but it was better than nothing. Art went first, stepping through the opening into total darkness. This was the 1920s steam tunnel. It was a round, brick-lined tube, barely 6 feet high. Art had to stoop. A single, massive, rust-covered pipe ran along the left side. A few inches of dark, still water covered the floor, and their flashlights revealed pale, stringy moss clinging to the walls. Home field advantage, Chin whispered, her voice muffled by the mask. Her light was on the tablet. We're in the right conduit. The main HVAC hub is 400 yards. Dead ahead. They moved. The only sounds were the splash, splash, splash of their boots in the water and the drip, drip, drip from the curved ceiling. It was claustrophobic. The air was heavy and cold. They were under the building, in the earth, in the place where the sterile apex met the messy world Sullivan loved. After 50 yards, the old tunnel began to change. Art, look, Chin said, pointing her beam at the wall. Alongside the rusted steam pipe, a new, insulated conduit had been expertly attached. And next to it, a neatly bundled trunk of fiber optic cable. He's been upgrading, Art said. He didn't just find these tunnels. He wired them. He's piggybacked onto the Apex's entire data network. They continued, moving faster. The tunnel was his highway. It led from his burrow in the woods straight to the building's heart. Then they heard it. It was a sound, so faint it was more of a vibration, felt through the soles of their shoes. A dull, heavy thud. They stopped, flashlights off, plunging the tunnel into absolute blackness. Another thud. Louder. "Keegan," Art whispered. "SWAT. They're at the main hub door. They're setting the breaching charges. The distraction." "It's working," Chen said. "He must be focused on them. Let's move." They pushed on, the tunnel beginning to slope gently upward. They passed 2 more junctions, dark holes leading off into the city's forgotten underground. But Sullivan's cables all led one way. The tunnel ended abruptly at a larger, brick-walled chamber. It looked like an old cistern or maintenance junction. And it was no longer just a tunnel. It was a command center. A folding table was set up. A bank of high-end servers hummed quietly, powered by a thick cable tapped directly into the building's main power conduit. On the table, 3 monitors glowed. Chen and Art approached, weapons raised. The room was empty. But Sullivan had been here, and recently. A half-eaten protein bar was on the table. Chen stepped up to the monitors. "Art, you need to see this." The first 2 monitors showed security feeds. But they weren't from the lobby. They were small, hidden cameras. Inside the main HVAC hub, they could see the massive stainless steel canisters, the ones that held the spores. The third monitor, it was a camera feed of the outside of the hub. They were looking at the backs of Keegan's SWAT team as they planted charges on the steel door. Sullivan was watching his own execution squad. "He's watching them set the trap," Art said. "It's worse than that," Chen said, her fingers moving to the keyboard. She was analyzing the code on the screen. It was a diagram of the HVAC system. "He's not just locked the system. He's rigged it. Art, it's a pressure-based deadman switch." "Speak English, Chin." "The midnight timer from the recording, that's the failsafe. The primary trigger is the door. The system is reading the air pressure in the hub. The second Keegan's breach breaks that seal, the system will interpret it as a catastrophic failure and execute its emergency protocol." "Which is?" Chen looked at him, her eyes wide with terror above the mask. "A full, immediate, high-velocity purge. He's not waiting for midnight. He's waiting for the breach. He's going to use our own people to set it off." Art grabbed his shoulder radio. "Keegan, abort. Abort the breach. It's a trap. Keegan, do you copy?" He was met with a wall of white noise. A high-pitched squeal. "He's jamming us," Chen said, pointing to a device humming under the table. "A broad-spectrum radio jammer. We're in a dead zone." He knew we'd try. From the tunnel ahead of them, the direction of the hub, they heard a new sound. A sharp, mechanical whir. And from Art's radio, a new, different sound. Keegan's voice, broken by static. "Arj, in 5, 4, 3. "No!" Art yelled. He and Chan were in a concrete box, cut off from the world, and they were the only 2 people who knew that in a matter of seconds, the bomb they'd sent in was about to go off. Art Jensen's radio crackled with Keegan's voice, distorted by static. 2, 1. "No!" Art bellowed, a useless, primal roar into the radio jammer's white noise. Chen didn't waste breath shouting. She acted. Her eyes wide with panic, she grabbed the thick bundle of fiber optic and power cable Sullivan had tapped into the building's main conduit. "The power. It's the only way." She yanked, pulling with all her weight. The cables were thick, seated deep. Art lunged to help her, dropping his radio. They braced their feet against the wet brick and pulled. The word breach was a distorted squawk from the dropped radio. It was followed by a sound so low it was felt more than heard. A deep, concussive whump that vibrated through the floor, up their legs, and into their chests. Dust and flakes of rust rained down from the ancient ceiling. On the third monitor, the one showing the SWAT team, the feed dissolved into pure static as the camera was obliterated. On the first 2 monitors, the ones inside the hub, the image was horrifying. The force of the breach slammed the heavy steel door inward. In the same instant, the tops of the massive stainless steel canisters in the hub popped open, triggered by the sudden, catastrophic change in air pressure. A dense, opaque, white-gray mist exploded from them, instantly filling the room. It wasn't smoke. It was a living, churning cloud of spores. "It's going!" Chen screamed. The monitor showed the main ventilation fans, huge turbines, begin to spin. The purge had begun. The cloud of spores was being sucked into the building's main trunk line. "Oh!" Art roared. With a final, desperate heave, the cables ripped free from their junction box in a shower of blue-white sparks. The monitors went black. The humming servers died. The lights in their tunnel junction, and the dim emergency lights in the tunnel itself, snapped off. They were plunged into absolute, deafening darkness and silence. The only sound was their own ragged, gasping breath inside their masks. Art fumbled for his flashlight, his hands shaking. He clicked it on. The beam cut the blackness, landing on Chen, who was on her hands and knees, also fumbling for her light. The air in the tunnel was still. The faint, earthy smell hadn't changed. Did we stop it? Art panted, his ears ringing from the concussion. Chen, did we stop it? Chen got her own light on, pointing the beam at her tablet, which was still glowing, running on its own battery. She was frantically tapping, trying to reacquire the building's network. I don't know, she whispered. We cut his control. The servers are dead. The digital trigger is offline. But the fans, they were already spinning. The canisters were already open. It's a mechanical system, Art. The pressure change, it was a physical trigger, not just a digital one. We didn't stop the purge. We just blinded him. From the tunnel ahead, in the darkness, came a new sound. It was not a machine. It was not the building. It was a slow, deliberate, mocking clap. Clap, clap, clap. Art spun, his weapon and his flashlight beam snapping toward the sound. Chen was beside him, her own light joining his. A figure stood there, 20 yards down the tunnel, blocking the path to the HVAC hub. He was tall and gaunt, his frame swallowed by mud-caked utility overalls. He was wearing a full-face, military-grade chemical respirator, its twin filters looking like the eyes of some monstrous insect. He held a heavy, battery-powered lantern, which cast a cold, white glow. It was Michael Sullivan. He lowered his hands. "Bravo, detectives." His voice was metallic and calm, amplified by a speaker on his mask. "Very impressive. You found the back door. You even found my little watch post. You're smarter than the soldiers." "It's over, Sullivan," Art said, his voice hard. He took a step forward. "We cut your power. The system is dead." Sullivan let out a laugh. It was a dry, joyless, amplified sound. "Dead? You cut a computer. You think my plan, my life's work, relied on a single plug? I learned that lesson 30 years ago from Harry and Julian. Technology fails. Steel rusts. Code breaks." He took a step toward them. His light was blinding. But nature is redundant. Nature is persistent. The breach was the key, detective. It opened the door. The primary canisters are empty. The purge is happening. The fans are spinning on their own momentum. The spores are in the trunk line. They're airborne. They are rising. "My God," Chin whispered. "Keegan, the SWAT team." "They were a necessary symbolic sacrifice," Sullivan said, his voice devoid of emotion. "They were the hammer that broke the vial. But the real work, the inoculation, is just beginning. You see, you've been working so hard to save the people." He raised his hand. In it, he held a small, black device with a single red button. "A detonator. You forgot to save the building," he said. He tilted his head, as if listening. "Do you hear that? The building is finally breathing. My work is done here." "The evacuation," Art said, stalling, trying to get a clear shot. "The building is empty." "For now," Sullivan agreed. "But the spores will wait. They'll settle. They'll find a home. And as for my tunnels, my highway." He looked at Art, then at Chen. "Your loose ends. And this highway is now closed." He pressed the button. A deep, grinding boom echoed from behind them, back down the tunnel they had just come from. The brick walls shook violently, and the ceiling gave way. A tidal wave of brick, mud, and foundation concrete collapsed into the tunnel, completely sealing their escape route. They were trapped. Trapped in the dark, with a mass murderer, in a tunnel that was now filling with a faint, unmistakable smell of damp earth. And, perhaps, something more. The world ended in dust and thunder. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed brick tunnel. Art Jensen was thrown to his knees, his flashlight skittering across the wet floor, plunging him into darkness. The air, already thick with the smell of wet earth, was now choked with plaster and pulverized brick. It was unbreathable. He heard Chin coughing, a dry, desperate heck next to him. "Chin, you hit." "No, I'm fine, she gasped, her own flashlight beam cutting through the swirling dust. The tunnel! Art, it's gone. Art retrieved his light and aimed it back the way they had come. It was no longer a tunnel. It was a solid wall of shattered brick, twisted rebar, and packed earth. Sullivan hadn't just blocked their escape, he had buried them. Welcome to the dark, detectives, Michael Sullivan's amplified voice echoed from the other direction, toward the breached hub. Welcome to my world. The world of the roots. You are now officially messy. Art snapped his flashlight beam toward the voice. Sullivan was gone. He hadn't stayed for a fight. He had just vanished back into the shadows. He's right, Jen said, her voice shaking, but her mind working. She was shining her light on her simple gas mask, now coated in gray dust. These masks, they were for dust and smoke. They won't stop the spores. Not for long. Sullivan said the purge is rising, Art said, grabbing her arm and pulling her to her feet. That means this is the lowest point. The air here is clean, for now. But we're on a clock. Every breath we take. We have to go forward, she finished, her voice hardening. Toward the breach. It's the only way out. It's also where the poison is, Art said grimly. It's where the source was, she corrected. And it's where the SWAT team is. We have to move. They moved, half crouching, their flashlight beams bouncing off the wet, curving walls. The air was still, heavy, and carried a new, faint, Swedish odor. It smelled like almonds and damp flowers. The toxin, Art muttered. Don't breathe deep, Jen ordered, a useless command. They emerged from the narrow brick tunnel into the vast, cavernous concrete space of the main ventilation hub. The scene was a nightmare. Keegan's SWAT team, 6 men in full black tactical gear, were scattered around the breached, twisted steel door. They hadn't been killed by the explosion. They were simply stopped. One was kneeling, as if about to reload. Another was standing, his hand on his radio. All were still, their eyes open and placid, their faces peaceful. The cloud of spores had hit them before they could even register the threat. They were statues, a monument to Sullivan's necessary sacrifice. My God, Art whispered, lowering his weapon. He had sent them in. Art. The fans, Jen said, pulling him forward. The room was dominated by 4 massive, turbine-like fans, each one the size of a jet engine. They were, as Sullivan had boasted, still spinning, but slowing. Whir. The sound was a dying moan. They had already sucked the contents of the primary canisters and pushed them up, into the lungs of the building. The canisters themselves, dozens of them, were open, empty, and slick with a faint, oily residue. We were too late, Art said, defeat settling on him like a shroud. It's done. The building is gassed. No, Jen said, her flashlight beam moving, scanning, analyzing. No, Art. This wasn't it. What are you talking about, Chen? Look at them. He gestured to the dead SWAT team. This was the trigger, she said, her voice electric with a new, dawning horror. She was pointing at the other side of the room. He called it an inoculation. A symbolic gesture. This was just phase 1. Art followed her light. Against the far wall, there was a second, entirely different array of canisters. These were larger, heavier, and painted bright red. They weren't connected to the ventilation fans. They were connected with a complex manifold of new, high-pressure pipes, directly to the building's main water line. They were wired to the Apex Tower's fire suppression sprinkler system. He didn't just poison the air, Chen whispered, her hand going to her mouth. He's poisoning the water. Art stared at the setup. He didn't understand. The sprinklers? Why? He's already gassed them. The gas will dissipate, Chen said, thinking fast, her mind racing. The ventilation system will eventually be purged. But this is permanent. He's going to dissolve a much heavier, more concentrated version of the toxin into the sprinkler system. Thousands of gallons of it. It'll sit there, in the pipes, forever. The building will be a death trap for decades. The first time there's a fire, the first time anyone tries to clean it out, it'll rain death. He's not just killing the occupants, Art said, finally understanding the scope of Sullivan's plan. He's killing the building. He's making the Great Sterilization a permanent tomb. A timer, a simple, old-fashioned digital timer, was attached to the main valve. It was counting down. 15 minutes and 32 seconds. 15 minutes. A timer, Art scoffed. He's back to a timer. Because he's not here, Chen said. This is automated. He set this, gas the SWAT team, and use the explosion to bury us. He's escaping. Where? Art looked around. There's no way out but the tunnels, and we're in them. He's a ghost, Art. He's got other paths. Chin was already at the control manifold, her fingers tracing the wires. It's a digital lock. I think I can bypass it, but I need time. You've got 15 minutes, Art said, his flashlight scanning the shadows, the high vents, the dark corners of the hub. No, she said, her voice tight. I need uninterrupted time. I'll buy it for you, Art said. A loud metallic clang echoed from a steel catwalk high above them. They both snapped their lights up. Michael Sullivan was standing there, looking down on them like a god. His respirator was still on. He held no detonator. He held only a long, heavy steel pipe. I am persistent, detectives, his amplified voice boomed. And I'm afraid I can't let you interfere with the baptism. This is the part where the monarch truly reclaims the land. He dropped the pipe. It crashed onto the concrete floor near Chen, shattering a panel. She cried out and scrambled back. Get to work, Chen, Art yelled. He raised his weapon. Sullivan, you want a mess? Come and get it. Sullivan laughed, a hollow, metallic sound, and vanished into the darkness of the upper superstructure. He was going to hunt them. Get to work, Chen. Art roared again, his voice raw. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He shoved his partner toward the massive, red-painted manifold of the sprinkler system, toward the glowing red timer. Don't look up. Just work. Chin didn't hesitate. She scrambled over the pipe Sullivan had thrown, her tablet already in hand. She slammed her shoulder against the concrete wall for balance, pulling a multi-tool from her belt. The timer read 14:32. She jammed a universal data jack into the digital lock's maintenance port. I'm in, but it's not just digital. He's cross-wired it. It's a hybrid lock, Art. Analog and digital. He built this to be unhackable. Then do it the old-fashioned way. Art yelled, his flashlight beam sweeping the darkness above. The HVAC hub was a cathedral of shadows. Massive turbines, ductwork the size of buses, and a spiderweb of steel catwalks crisscrossed the ceiling 40 feet up. Sullivan was up there, somewhere. He was fast, he was silent, and this was his home. Art moved, putting himself between Chen and the darkness. He ducked behind one of the now silent, 4-foot-thick ventilation fans, using its massive housing for cover. His heart hammered against his ribs. His simple dust mask felt suffocatingly hot. 7 days, detective, Sullivan's amplified voice echoed, seeming to come from everywhere at once. You're so close to your quiet, pathetic little life. Why are you here? Why throw it all away for a building? For a city that's already dead? Art stayed silent. He was a cop, not a philosopher. He listened, trying to pinpoint the voice. It was moving. High, to his left. You're breathing it in, you know, the voice taunted, closer now. The air. It's getting sweeter, isn't it? That's the primary inoculation. The one you just fed to that SWAT team. Your mask. It's just paper, Arthur. It won't help you for long. Art felt a wave of dizziness. Was it the spores? Or the 49-flight climb? He didn't know. He wouldn't let it matter. He gripped his pistol, his knuckles white. A heavy wrench crashed onto the concrete floor just inches from his foot, spinning with a loud metallic clatter. Art flinched, jumping back. Got you, the voice laughed. Sullivan's flashlight beam pinned him. Art was blinded, a perfect target. He didn't freeze. He fired. Art squeezed the trigger twice, aiming at the light. The shots were deafening. The first shot shattered the flashlight. The second pinged off the steel railing of the catwalk. The light died, and the hub was plunged back into a darkness broken only by Chen's small headlamp and the ominous red glow of the timer. Lucky shot, old man. Sullivan's voice was now tinged with genuine anger. You're just like them. You see something you don't understand, and you shoot it. You're just another piece of dead technology. Art, I've hit a firewall. Chin yelled, her voice strained. He's rerouting the code faster than I can crack it. I have to go manual. I'm opening the panel. The timer, 9:47. Art knew he had to do more than hide. He had to end this. He couldn't get up to Sullivan. He had to bring Sullivan down. He moved, scrambling from the turbine to a bank of transformers. He scanned the infrastructure. This was a place of power, of steam, of pressure. This was the building's heart. And all of it was dead technology. His eyes landed on it. A large insulated pipe, thick as his thigh, ran vertically up the wall, passing directly beneath the section of catwalk where Sullivan was hiding. A pressure release valve, marked with a red warning placard, was 3 feet from the floor. It wasn't water. It was high-pressure steam, used for the building's humidification systems. "You're right, Sullivan," Art yelled into the darkness, his voice hoarse. "I'm not a ghost. I'm not a gardener." He stepped out from behind the transformer, into the open. "What are you doing, you fool?" Sullivan's voice hissed. He was directly above Art. Art raised his pistol, not at the shadows, but at the valve. "I'm just messy." He fired. Not once. He emptied the rest of his clip into the valve and the pipe joint. 6 shots, one after another, in a deafening, controlled barrage. The metal screamed. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with the roar of a jet engine, the joint failed. A pillar of pure, white, superheated steam erupted from the pipe, shooting straight up. It was a geyser, a 20-foot column of scalding, blinding force, and it hit the catwalk exactly where Sullivan was standing. The amplified speaker shrieked. It wasn't a taunt. It was a raw, human scream of agony. Sullivan was completely enveloped. He stumbled back, blinded, his high-tech respirator melting, his clothes vaporizing. He flailed wildly, his hands grabbing at his ruined face. He lost his footing on the narrow steel grate. And he fell. He dropped 40 feet, a dead weight, crashing onto the concrete floor with a sickening final thud. Art watched him fall, his weapon smoking. He was panting, his ears ringing. He had won. The ghost was down. Sullivan lay twisted, his mask shattered, his face a ruin. He was gasping, his lungs now unprotected, breathing in the same spore-filled air he had unleashed. "Art!" Chen screamed, her voice high with a new, different panic. "Art, no. It was a trap." Art spun around. Chen was on her knees in front of the open panel. The timer, which had read over 2 minutes, was now flashing, 0:30. "It was a honeypot," she cried, pulling at a nest of wires. The digital lock was a fake. The real trigger was a pressure plate inside the panel. I opened it, and it triggered the final countdown. "I can't stop it. I can't stop it." Art stared. 0:25, 0:24. He looked at the dying killer on the floor. He looked at the unstoppable bomb. He had won the fight, but he had just lost the war. 20 seconds. Chen's voice was a high-pitched shriek of pure panic. She was tearing at the wire panel, her gloved fingers bloody. "It's a physical trigger, Art. The pressure plate. I can't bypass it. It's hardwired. It's going to blow." The small, red timer flashed. 0:19, 0:18. Art Jensen stood frozen for 1 second, his smoking gun hanging uselessly at his side. He'd won. He'd beaten the man. He'd taken out the ghost. But the ghost's bomb, the real final vengeance, was still ticking. He looked at his gun. It was empty. Useless. Dead technology. He looked at Michael Sullivan. The killer was sprawled on the concrete, his body broken from the fall. His shattered mask was beside him. He was dying, his chest rattling as he breathed in his own creation, but his eyes were open. He was watching, and he was smiling. "My baptism." Sullivan gurgled, a bloody laugh. "Irreversible. The water will rain forever." 0:15. Art looked at Chen, then at the bomb. He couldn't stop the timer. He couldn't stop the detonator. But he could stop the delivery. His eyes scanned the setup. The red canisters, the timer, and the single massive, 3-inch thick insulated pipe that fed the entire manifold. The pipe that connected Sullivan's poison to the building's water supply. "Chen, get back," he roared. "Get behind the turbine. Now." "What?" "Art, no. Go." Chen scrambled back, her face pale with terror. 0:10. Art ran. He didn't run to Chen. He ran toward the mess of tools and debris Sullivan had thrown from the catwalk. He grabbed the weapon the killer himself had provided, the long, heavy, solid steel pipe. It was heavy. Too heavy. His back, his knees, his shoulders, they all screamed in protest. 0:08. Too late, old man. Sullivan coughed. Art ignored him. He planted his feet. He was 30 years on the force. He was 7 days from retirement. He was too old for this. He raised the pipe over his head like a woodsman's axe. "I am not a ghost," he bellowed. 006. He swung. The pipe connected with the main joint with a deafening clang that echoed through the hub. The joint dented. The insulation cracked. But it held. 004. Again. Chen screamed. Art roared, a sound of pure, desperate agony and effort. He didn't have time for a full swing. He just jabbed, a brutal, horizontal thrust, aiming for the dent. 003. The pipe hit the weakened metal. 002. A crack appeared. A hairline fracture. He swung one last time, a wild, desperate baseball swing, putting every ounce of his remaining strength, every day of his 30 years, into the blow. 001. The sound was not a clang. It was a crack. The joint didn't just break, it shattered. The main pipe tore free from the manifold. Midnight. The timer flashed 0. A loud, mechanical click echoed from the red canisters. The primary valves, obedient to their timer, snapped open. But the baptism failed. Instead of shooting into the building's sprinkler system, the pressurized, dark, oily toxin exploded outward from the break Art had just created. A torrent of foul-smelling liquid geysered sideways, hammering the concrete wall with the force of a fire hose. It was a flood. The poison poured onto the floor, mixing with the mud, the dust, and the blood. It was a black, toxic river that was going nowhere, its connection to the building severed. Art stood, swaying, the heavy pipe clattering from his numb fingers. He was breathing in ragged, painful gasps. His mask was failing. The sweet, chemical smell was overpowering. He looked down at Michael Sullivan. The killer's eyes were fixed on the black, gushing liquid as it pooled harmlessly around his own broken body. His baptism, his permanent, natural legacy, was just a toxic puddle on a concrete floor. His smile was gone. Dead. He whispered, his eyes finding Art's. Dead. Technology. A final, rattling cough shook his frame, and Michael Sullivan, the ghost of Project Redwood, was still. The hub was silent, save for the glug-glug-glug of the last of the poison draining from the canisters. Art! Art, you did it! Chen's voice was a whisper. She ran from behind the turbine, her flashlight beam finding him. You did it. It's over. Art nodded, leaning back against the cold concrete wall. He slid down, his legs finally giving out. He was exhausted, more tired than he had ever been in his life. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only a deep, profound ache. Yeah, he panted. Case closed. He tried to take a deep breath, but his lungs felt wrong. Heavy. Thick. The dizziness he'd felt earlier returned, a wave of vertigo that made the room spin. Chen, he said, his voice sounding distant. I'm here, Art. I'm here. We're okay. She was fumbling with her radio, which was now blessedly free of static. This is Detective Chen. I'm in the HVAC hub, sub-level 3. We have an officer down. We need hazmat and medical. The primary threat is neutralized, but we are in the hot zone. And the tunnel is collapsed. We need rescue. Art looked at his hands. They were trembling. Not from exertion. It was a fine, uncontrollable tremor. Chen, he tried again, his voice a slurred whisper. The air. The phase 1. The spores. He looked up at her. Her face was pale, streaked with grime, but her eyes were sharp. I know, Art. I know. They're on their way. Just stay with me. Talk to me. My mask, he said. He reached up to touch it. It was soaked. It's just paper, she said. No, Art, don't, she pleaded. He coughed, a shallow, dry hack. He was right, Chin. The distraction, the SWAT team. We were in that room for how long? Breathing it in. His vision was blurring at the edges. The room's dim light seemed to be fading, collapsing inward. It's over, Art. You won, she said, her voice breaking. Art Jensen, 7 days from retirement, looked at his dying killer, at the neutralized bomb, and at the toxic air he was breathing. He had stopped the bomb. He had saved the building. But he had been breathing in the poison, the real poison, the entire time. Yeah, he whispered as his eyes slipped shut. But I think he won too. The world was gray, not black. A thick, oppressive, suffocating gray. Art Jensen's consciousness was a flickering candle in a hurricane. He was floating. The only sensation was the sweet, cloying smell of almonds and damp flowers. It was in his mouth, his nose, his lungs. He heard a voice, impossibly far away. It was Chen. She was shouting, but it sounded like she was at the end of a long tunnel, a different tunnel, one made of static and water. Officer down. I need extraction. Sub-level 3 HVAC. He's not breathing. I repeat, he is not breathing. Then, a new voice, tinny and distant from her radio. Miller. Chin, what's your status? The tunnel collapse. We can't breach it. It's unstable. And Hazmat says the main hub door, the one SWAT used, it's a hot zone. We can't go in that way. We can't get to you. Trapped. The word echoed in the gray fog of Art's mind. He won. Then pain. A sharp, rhythmic, concussive force on his chest. Thump, thump, thump. Don't you do this, Art. Chin was screaming, not into the radio, but at him. Don't you dare. Breathe, damn it. Art's body arched in an involuntary spasm. A gasp of air, thick, toxic, and agonizing, burned its way into his lungs. The gray dissolved into a blinding pinprick of light. He was looking up at Chen's face, her cheap gas mask discarded, her face streaked with tears and grime, her knuckles pressed hard into his sternum. I'm. He tried to say, but it came out as a wet cough. A dark speckle of blood hit his own chest. Oh God, Chen whispered, her hands flying back to her radio. Captain. He's breathing, but it's bad. He's coughing blood. The spores, they're in him. You have to find another way. We're working on it, Detective, Miller's voice was strained. We're looking at the old blueprints. The ones you found. The maps, Chen said, her head snapping up. Her flashlight beam, which had been on Art, shot to her tablet. She'd left it by the control panel. She scrambled over to it, her boots splashing in the toxic puddle that was Sullivan's failed baptism. The maps. She muttered, her fingers flying, cross-referencing Sullivan's hand-drawn tunnel maps with the Apex blueprints. He wasn't just using the steam tunnels. He had junctions. He had, yes. Here. She aimed her radio at the tablet. Captain, forget the tunnels. Look at the original 1920s steam plant schematic. There's a vertical utility chase. An old smokestack, a flue, that runs from the plant level up to the sub-level 1 service bay. Sullivan marked it, clean V. It's 30 yards from my position. It's the only way. A pause. We see it, Miller said. But Chen, that's a 40-foot vertical climb. It's a sheer shaft. Then send ropes, she yelled. Send Dr. Evans. Send Hazmat. He doesn't have time for a new tunnel. He's got minutes. They're on their way down, Miller's voice confirmed. Hang on. Chen ran back to Art. He was conscious, barely. His eyes were open, but they were unfocused. The tremor in his hands was now a full-body shiver. It's cold, Art whispered. No, Art, you're in shock, she said, pulling off her own tactical jacket and laying it over him. They're coming. They're coming down the flue. You just have to hold on. 7 days, remember? You're not checking out on my watch. The twist. Art murmured, a faint, grim smile touching his blue-tinged lips. The final twist wasn't the bomb. It was the air. It was always the air. Shh, don't talk. Save your breath. Did you? He coughed. Did you breathe it too? Chin froze. She hadn't let herself think about it. Her own mask. She'd been running, shouting, fighting. She had ripped it off to give Art CPR. She had been breathing this air, this sweet, deadly air, for how long? She tasted something. Metallic. Like old pennies. I'm fine, Art, she lied. I'm fine. A new sound. Not a drip. Not a machine. A scraping, metallic sound from the darkness at the edge of the hub. Chen, a muffled voice called. Hazmat. We're at the flue. 3 figures emerged from a dark, square opening in the wall that Art and Chen hadn't even seen. They were not men. They were aliens. They were encased in bright yellow, fully sealed Level A hazardous materials suits. Their faces were obscured by massive, clear bubble helmets, and the only sound was the low, rhythmic hiss of their rebreather packs. Dr. Evans, his name taped across his chest, was in the lead. He was carrying a heavy medical pack. My God, Evans's voice crackled over a small speaker on his suit. He saw the dead SWAT team. He saw the toxic flood. He saw Sullivan's broken body. Then he saw Art. He was on his knees beside Art in an instant. He's cyanotic. Respiratory failure is imminent. He ripped a sealed package open, revealing a large, complex syringe. This is an experimental atropine variant. It might slow the neurotoxin's effect on his vagus nerve, but it won't stop it. We have to get him out. Now. He injected Art in the thigh, right through his pants. Art didn't even flinch. His eyes were closing again. Package him, Evans ordered. The other two hazmat techs produced a lightweight sked rescue stretcher and a harness. They worked with terrifying cold efficiency, strapping Art's limp body onto the stretcher, securing a clear oxygen mask over his face. Detective Chen, Evans said, turning to her. His bubble helmet reflected the red glow of the dead timer. You performed CPR on him. Yes, she said, her voice small. You were exposed. You're contaminated. I know. She tasted the copper again, stronger now. A dizzy spell washed over her. We have to bag you, he said, holding up a large, clear plastic decontamination bag. It's protocol. We can't let you walk out of this hot zone. You're a victim too, detective. Chen looked at Art, now a helpless package being hooked to a winch system, ready to be hauled up 40 feet into the darkness. She looked at the dead men around her. She had survived the explosions, the fight, and the timer. But the case wasn't over. It had just followed her, inside her. Understood, she said, holding out her hands as the hazmat tech approached her with the bag. Let's go. The world returned to Sarah Chen in fragments. First, the smell of pressurized, chemical-laden air. Then, the sound. A rhythmic, muffled hiss, the sound of her own breathing, trapped and amplified inside the clear plastic decontamination bag. She was on a gurney, moving fast. The wheels squeaked on a polished floor. She was a specimen, a piece of evidence. She was no longer a detective. Through the fogged plastic, she saw Art. He was a package, just as Dr. Evans had said. He was being wheeled alongside her, cocooned on the sked stretcher, a different medical team surrounding him. He was a still, lifeless shape under the clear oxygen mask. They burst through a set of double doors into what she recognized as the Apex's sub-level 1 service bay. But it was transformed. It was a sea of flashing red and blue lights, filtered through the plastic sheeting that had been stapled everywhere, creating a pressurized containment corridor. She saw Captain Miller. His face was a pale, haggard mask under the harsh fluorescent lights. He was standing behind the plastic barrier, yelling, but she couldn't hear him. Clear the way. Dr. Evans's voice was the only one that cut through. He's going to use Samriad at Ridley General. We need a hot transport now. Get the mobile containment unit ready. Art's gurney was wheeled past Miller, toward an open bay door where a specialized ambulance, looking more like a small white tank, was waiting. Chin tried to sit up, but the bag and the straps held her down. Captain, she yelled, her voice muffled, useless. The files. Project Redwood. Miller saw her move. He pressed his face close to the plastic, his eyes finding hers. He put his hand up, a gesture of comfort or dismissal. We'll get the files, Chen. His voice was barely audible through the barrier. We're handling it. You just focus on breathing. You did good. Now let the doctors do their job. Her gurney was diverted, not to the main transport, to a secondary ambulance. They were being separated. She was contaminated. He was critical. They were two different categories of victim. The ride was a blur. She lay in the back of the ambulance, the sounds of the city, the rain, the sirens, the traffic, a distant, watery roar. The metallic taste in her mouth was stronger now. A headache was building behind her eyes, a sharp, cold spike. She wasn't just exposed. She was sick. The fear, which she had held at bay with adrenaline and duty, now wrapped its cold hands around her. They didn't take her through the main emergency room. They took her through a subterranean entrance marked BIO containment in stark red letters. The next hour was a humiliating blur of chemical efficiency. She was cut out of the Deccan bag. Her clothes, her boots, her badge, her weapon, everything she was, were dropped into a yellow hazardous waste barrel, destined for an incinerator. She was pushed under a high-pressure deluge of stinging, ice-cold chemical wash, then a scalding hot one. She was scrubbed raw by technicians in the same bright yellow suits she'd seen in the tunnel. She was no longer a person. She was a surface to be sterilized. Finally, clean, raw, and shaking, she was given a thin paper gown and led into a room. It was not a hospital room. It was a glass box. The walls were thick glass. The door was a heavy steel hatch that hissed shut and locked with a pneumatic thud. The air was recycled with a low, constant hum. In the corner was a bed. On the wall was an intercom. She sat on the bed, her entire body trembling, whether from the cold, the chemicals, or the poison, she didn't know. The intercom crackled. Detective Chin. I'm Dr. Eris. You are in a level 4 biocontainment ward. You will be safe here. We will be monitoring you. Where is Detective Jensen? She croaked. Her throat felt like sandpaper. There was a pause. The doctor's voice, when it returned, was carefully neutral. Detective Jensen is in the adjacent ward. He's in critical condition. His exposure was profound. We have him in a medically induced coma to protect his neural functions. His lungs are severely compromised. But Hill. Chin couldn't finish the sentence. We are synthesizing an antitoxin from the samples recovered at the scene, Dr. Eris said, his voice flat. But this is a bespoke compound. Sullivan was a genius and a madman. It's not a virus. It's not a bacteria. It's a fungal protein designed to cascade. We're fighting the clock, Detective. Honestly, his chances are not good. The words hit Chen harder than the explosion. Not good. Art had won. He'd saved the building. And it was going to kill him. She was alone. Utterly, completely alone. She lay back, and the crushing weight of the case, the climb, the fight, and the poison finally claimed her. She slept. When she woke, the first thing she saw was Captain Miller's face, staring at her from the other side of the glass. He looked like he'd aged 10 years. Chen, he said over the intercom. His voice was rough. Art was the only word she could manage. No change, Miller said, shaking his head. He's holding. That's what they say. But you're stable. Your blood work, your load was minimal. Dr. Evans said, he said your CPR, breathing into Art, you might have saved his life, but you also took on some of his load. But you're fighting it. They think you'll be fine. A week in here, maybe. A week, she whispered. The case is closed, Sarah, he said, trying for a smile. We mopped it all up. We found Sullivan's burrow, the monarch tree, all his notes. It's a clean sweep. A 30-year grudge. A lone wolf eco-terrorist. The press is calling it the battle for the apex. You and Art, you're heroes. It should have felt like a victory. It felt hollow. Closed, she repeated, her tired mind slowly processing the words. Lone wolf. A clean sweep. Yeah, we're dotting the I's. We recovered all of Sullivan's hardware from the tunnel junction. Top-of-the-line servers, military-grade jammers, advanced chemical catalysts. The guy was... Miller paused, frowning. Chen's eyes snapped open. Her headache, the fog, it was all gone, replaced by a single, sharp, cold thought. Wait, she said, sitting up. Hardware. Military-grade. Yeah, Miller said. Weird, right? For a guy living under a tree for 30 years. Captain, Chen said, her voice suddenly strong, clear. Where did he get it? Miller blinked. What? A ghost. A man with no digital footprint. Where did he get the money, Captain? Where did he get the high-end servers? The custom-built digital timers? The fiber optic cable? The raw materials for a weaponized, bespoke neurotoxin? That's not a grudge, Captain. That's a budget. A massive one. Miller's tired expression slowly dissolved into one of dawning confusion. He had been so focused on the end of the case, he'd missed the beginning. He had help, Chen said, standing up, walking to the glass, her eyes burning with a new, terrifying fire. Someone was funding him. Someone wanted Vance and Thorne dead, and they used Sullivan's obsession to do it. This isn't over. We didn't catch the killer. We just caught the weapon. Captain Miller stared at Chen through the thick, sterile glass. His expression was one of profound exhaustion, mixed with a deep, paternal pity. Chen, he said, his voice crackling with the intercom static. Listen to me. You're in shock. You've been through a catastrophic event. You're contaminated with a Class A neurotoxin. You are not thinking clearly. I've never thought more clearly, she retorted, stepping closer to the glass, her small paper-gowned frame rigid. You're a cop, Captain. Think. A ghost living under a tree. How does he afford a military-grade radio jammer? How does he buy banks of high-end servers? How does he get the fiber optic cable to wire acres of city tunnels? That's not passion, that's procurement. That's not a grudge, that's a budget. Miller rubbed his face, his gaze dropping to the floor. He could have stolen it, salvaged it over the decades. No, Chen insisted, her voice rising. This wasn't salvaged junk. This was cutting edge. The tech in that junction was newer than some of the gear in our own precinct. He was being funded. Someone was his quartermaster. Someone with deep pockets and a shared grudge. A heavy silence filled the space between them, broken only by the low hum of the air filtration. Miller knew she was right. The detail had been nagging at him, but he'd buried it under the avalanche of case-closed paperwork and the victory of evacuating the apex. "Okay," he said slowly, lifting his eyes. They were the eyes of a man who'd just been told the war wasn't over. "Okay, so, a partner, a financier. Who? We're back to motive. Who benefits?" "That's the wrong question," Chen said, her mind racing, connecting the dots. "We've been asking who benefits from their deaths today?" The answer was no one. The money went to a trust. That's why Lone Wolf seemed to fit. She began to pace the tiny 3-step length of her room. "You have to look back. Not at today. You have to look at 30 years ago. Who lost? Who else was destroyed by the failure of Project Redwood?" "Thorne told us," Miller said. "The investors. They pulled out." "Did they?" Chin pressed her hand against the cold glass. "Or were they pushed?" Vance was the visionary. Thorne was the logistician. Sullivan was the engineer. But they weren't the money. Who was the money, Captain? Miller was motionless. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a new, much uglier picture. "Sullivan was the perfect weapon," Chin continued, her voice low and intense. "A brilliant, broken man, already consumed by a righteous vendetta. All someone had to do was feed him, nurture his rage, give him the tools and the time. 30 years. They weaponized his grief, pointed him at Vance and Thorne, and waited. And now, their two biggest rivals are dead, and the murderer, Michael Sullivan, is conveniently dead, too. It's the perfect, sterile, high-tech murder by proxy." "The original investors," Miller breathed, his mind finally catching up. "Someone who lost everything when Vance and Thorne pivoted to create Nexus." "Find them," Chin said. "Please. I'm locked in this box. Art is in his. I can't do this. You have to. Pull the original incorporation documents for Project Redwood. Find the investor list. Find out who else was in that room when the dream died." Miller looked down the hall, in the direction of Art's critical care unit. The mention of his dying detective settled the argument. "A 30-year-old investor list," Miller sighed, looking back at Chen. He wasn't looking at a patient anymore. He was looking at his lead detective. That's a cold trail, buried under decades of paperwork. "It's the only trail we have," she said. "The killer isn't a ghost in the tunnels. He's a name on a piece of paper. Go find him." Miller nodded, his face set in a new, hard mask of resolve. "I'll put the entire financial crimes unit on it. I'll get a warrant for the Nexus archives. I'll find that list." He paused, his hand on the intercom switch. You rest, Chin. Dr. Eris says you're fighting the toxin. You're winning. We need you back." "I'm not resting until this is over," she replied. He nodded again and turned, his long strides purposeful as he walked away. Chen was left alone in the silence of her glass box. The hum of the air filtration was the only sound. She was a detective with no gun, no badge, and no computer. Her only connection to the outside world was a man who had, 10 minutes ago, believed the case was closed. She walked to the wall that separated her room from Art's. She couldn't see him, couldn't hear him. She could only feel the low, mechanical vibration of the hospital keeping him alive. "Hold on, Art," she whispered, pressing her forehead against the cool, sterile glass. "It's not over. The final twist, it's just getting started." Time in a glass box is not time at all. It is a slow, sterile drip. For Sarah Chin, the next 36 hours were a special kind of hell. She was a detective with no case, no tools, and no partner. She was a body, monitored and tested. Doctors in biocontainment suits would enter, draw blood, take readings, and leave, offering only clinical non-answers. "Your lymphocyte count is stabilizing, detective," Dr. Eris would say over the intercom, his voice devoid of emotion. "The toxin is present, but your immune system is successfully mapping it. You're fortunate. Your exposure was a fraction of Detective Jensen's." "What about Detective Jensen?" she would ask, every time. And the answer was always the same. "No change. He is stable, but the coma is deep. The toxin has bonded. We are attempting a new plasmapheresis treatment, but we are in uncharted territory." Stable. Not improving. A living death, engineered by a dead man. She would stand at the glass wall separating her from the corridor, watching, waiting. She had demanded a notepad and pen, and the doctors, after clearing them for contamination, had provided them. She filled page after page with notes, diagrams of the tunnels, timelines of the murders, and one single, burning question, circled a dozen times. Who funded the ghost? Meanwhile, Captain Miller had unleashed hell on 30-year-old paper. He'd taken Chen's theory and hammered it into a warrant. The Financial Crimes Unit was dispatched not to the high-tech, humming server rooms of the Apex, but to the dusty, climate-controlled, and forgotten paper archives in the building's sub-basement. "It's a mountain, Captain," a young, sharp-eyed financial detective named Diaz had reported, his voice muffled by a dust mask, an ironic echo of the case. "Vance kept everything. We're talking literal tons of paper. Find the box, Diaz," Miller had ordered, his voice raw from sleeplessness and too much coffee. "Project Redwood. Incorporation. 1988 to 1995. For 24 hours, they dug. They unearthed a world before Nexus, a world of paper ledgers, of blueprints that smelled of mold, of contracts signed with real ink. And then, Diaz found it. A heavy, cloth-bound ledger, its cover stamped with the project's optimistic logo, a tree growing through a circuit board. Inside, on brittle, yellowed paper, was the investor list. It was short. Harrison Vance, majority share. Julian Thorne, junior partner share. Michael Sullivan, sweat equity/patent assignment. Ridley City Municipal Fund, withdrawn. Albright Capital Partners, angel investor. Albright, Miller said, the name sounding a sharp, dissonant bell in his memory. As in? Running it now, sir, Diaz said, typing into his laptop, the 21st century layered over the 20th. Albright Capital, a small, aggressive venture fund, headed by a Robert Albright. He sued Vance and Thorne in 1995 after Project Redwood collapsed. Claimed fraud, breach of contract. He lost. The legal fees bankrupted him. Diaz paused, his eyes widening. Sir, Robert Albright committed suicide in 1996. He lost everything. The official file says he was ruined by the Vance-Thorne venture. A dead end, Miller said, his hope sinking. A motive, but a dead man. Not entirely, Captain, Diaz said, clicking. Robert Albright had one child. His sole heir. She was a college student at the time, studying computer science and corporate security. Her name is Eliza Albright. Miller went pale. He knew that name. He knew it instantly. It was the name Thorne had spoken in his office, a lifetime ago. The other person with a level 9 key. Get me the Nexus personnel file for Eliza Albright. Miller's voice was a low, dangerous growl. Fast. He didn't wait. He didn't call. He walked back down to the biocontainment ward, his feet heavy. He was holding a single printed-out sheet of paper. Chin was asleep, slumped in the hard plastic chair. Miller's arrival, his dark shape at the glass, startled her awake. She was at the glass in a second. He didn't speak. He simply pressed the paper against the glass for her to read. It was a Nexus personnel file. At the top was a crisp, professional corporate headshot of a woman in her late 40s, with cold, intelligent eyes and perfectly manicured hair. Name: Albright, Eliza. Position: Head of Global Security, Nexus Corporation. Tenure: 22 years. Security clearance: Level 9, Alpha. Chin read the name. Then she read the position. Head of Security. She remembered Thorne's voice, floating in his sterile office. The head of Nexus Security, Ms. Albright, also has it. The third key. The third key holder, whose father had been destroyed by the other two. She was inside the fortress the whole time, Chin whispered, her blood running cold. She didn't just have a grudge. She had the keys. She's been playing a 30-year game, Miller said, his voice a gravelly rasp over the intercom. She found Sullivan. She funded him. She gave him the high-end tech, the servers, the jammers. She was his angel investor, just like her father. Chin stared at the picture of the cold, professional woman, the perfect, loyal employee who had worked her way up for 2 decades. She didn't just point him, Captain, Chin said, the final horrific piece clicking into place. She enabled him. Sullivan couldn't bypass the Apex security, because it was her security. She lowered the shields for him. She knew where the cameras were. She knew about the old tunnels. She didn't just give him the gun. She held the door open while he pulled the trigger. She's the one, Miller said. And she's still in the building, Chin said, her eyes locked on his. She's at the top of the tower in her office, running damage control. And she thinks she just got away with the perfect murder. Captain Miller leaned his forehead against the cool, sterile glass, the implications of Chen's words settling on him like a shroud. Eliza Albright, he breathed, his voice rasping over the intercom. She's the head of security. She sees every camera in the building, probably half the city. She could be watching us, right now. Chin stood, her thin paper gown rustling. She was weak, but her eyes were fire. That's why she's winning. She's invisible. She's behind the screen. We have to draw her out. How? Miller said, exasperated. I send a SWAT team to her office. She locks down the elevators, calls her lawyers, and claims harassment. She'll say, I've been helping you all along. She has a logical, clean answer for everything. Exactly, Chin said. She's safe in her fortress. So, she has to leave the fortress. She has to come here, to a place she doesn't control. Here? Why would she come here? Because she's a perfectionist, Chin said, her mind racing. Her father was ruined and killed himself. She's been planning this for 30 years. She killed Vance. She killed Thorne. Sullivan, her weapon, is dead. She's tying up every loose end. But there are two ends still flapping in the wind. Miller's eyes widened. You and Art. Right, Chin said. She thinks I'm contained, poisoned, but no threat. And she thinks Art. She thinks he's dying. She needs him to die. If she believes, for 1 second, that Art is waking up, that he can talk, she can't risk her 30-year masterpiece. She'll come here to finish the job herself. You want to use him as bait. Miller protested. He's already bait. Chin shot back. Captain, call Dr. Eris. Now. A few minutes later, Dr. Eris stood beside Miller in the corridor, his face a mask of disbelief. What you're suggesting is insane, Eris said over the intercom, his voice shaking. To fake a patient's chart? It's a massive ethical violation. Doctor, Chin said, her voice calm and deadly. A killer who thinks she's free is watching your system. She needs Art Jensen to die. If she thinks he's waking up, she will come here to silence him permanently. She will walk right into our trap. You're asking me to risk his life. We're asking you to save it. Miller growled, finally understanding. Doctor, we're setting a trap. All you have to do is make one entry in the system. Just a digital note. Patient showing improvement. Responding to stimuli. Reducing sedation. That's all. We'll handle the rest. Dr. Eris hesitated, his gaze shifting from Chen's desperate face to the dark, quiet window of Art's critical care unit. If she comes, she's a professional. She'll be disguised. A nurse, another doctor. That's why I'll have plainclothes officers on every corner, Miller said, his hand already on his radio. She won't make it past the elevator bank. Just update the chart, Doctor. Please. Dr. Eris let out a long, heavy breath and nodded. All right. I'll do it. God help us if this doesn't work. 50 stories up, in the Apex Security Hub, Eliza Albright sipped a cup of tea. Her office was as pristine as Thorne's, but more functional. The walls were a mosaic of monitors, displaying camera feeds from the building, the police activity, and a small, flagged window monitoring the Ridley General Hospital intake. She was calm. Sullivan, the emotional, messy variable, was dead. The evidence all pointed to the madman. It was a perfect, clean-cut case. She had been monitoring the files for Jensen, Arthur, and Chen, Sarah. Chen, stable, recovery. A minor threat, but she saw nothing. She was in the tunnels. Jensen, critical, coma. He would die, or if he lived, his brain would be soup. Eliza was about to close the window when the line item for Art Jensen flashed red. Patient status update, responding to stimuli. Neural activity increased. Reducing sedation protocol. Eliza's hand froze. The teacup clattered against the saucer. Impossible. She had reviewed Sullivan's designs for the spores. The dosage was catastrophic. There was no waking up from that. Unless he did. Unless he talked. Art Jensen wasn't just in the tunnels. He was in Thorne's office. He was in Vance's penthouse. He was the one, single, continuous thread. He was the loose end that could unravel everything. Eliza Albright had waited 30 years. She had watched her father's legacy be erased. She had patiently built her career in the shadow of her enemies, built the very fortress they hid inside. She would not lose it all now, on a maybe. She pressed a button on her console. Ready my car. Ridley General. I'm paying a visit to our wounded detectives, part of the Nexus Cares program. She opened a locked, biometric drawer in her desk. Inside was a small, black kit, a single, palm-sized syringe, and a small, unlabeled vial of clear liquid. In the biocontainment ward, Captain Miller's phone vibrated. A text from his plainclothes officer in the lobby. He keyed the intercom, his voice low and hard as steel. Chin. She's in the building. Eliza Albright. Just signed in at the visitor's desk. She's alone. She took the bait. Chin stood up, weak but steady, pressing her hand to the glass. The trap is set, Captain, she whispered. Now catch the spider. Eliza Albright moved through the hospital corridors with the silent, confident grace of a predator. She wasn't disguised. She didn't need to be. She was wearing an impeccable, dark gray pantsuit, her Nexus ID clipped to her lapel, and she carried a bouquet of expensive, sterile-looking white lilies. She was the picture of concerned, corporate leadership. A plainclothes officer, disguised as an orderly pushing a cart, watched her pass the main nurse's station. Target is on the move. Approaching containment wing, he whispered into his wrist comm. All units hold, Miller's voice, from a nearby utility closet, replied. Let her get to the door. I want her at the door. Chin watched from her glass box, her heart a cold, hard knot in her chest. She saw Eliza appear at the far end of the corridor, a vision of calm, murderous intent. She saw the lilies and felt a wave of nausea. A gift for the dead. Eliza walked down the biocontainment hall. She passed Chen's room first. She paused, just for a second, and looked in. Her eyes, cold and analytical, met Chen's. There was no recognition, no fear, just appraisal. She saw a weak, contaminated victim in a paper gown. She dismissed her. Then, she turned and walked the final 10 steps to the heavy steel door of Art Jensen's critical care unit. A single, nervous-looking hospital guard, a plant from Miller's team, stood beside the door. Ma'am, I'm sorry. This is a level 4 quarantine. No visitors. Eliza gave him a smile that was all ice and no warmth. I am Eliza Albright, head of Nexus Security. This man is a hero who saved my building. His medical care is being subsidized by the Nexus Corporation. I am here to personally review his security and care. Now, open the door. She held up her Nexus ID, which had a high-frequency chip. She was banking on her authority, her sheer audacity, to bully her way through. I can't, ma'am. It's biometrically locked to the medical staff. Then get one, Eliza commanded, her voice dropping to a low, non-negotiable steel. She was reaching into her pocket, not for a phone, but for the small kit. That won't be necessary, a new voice said. Eliza froze. Captain Miller stepped out of the utility closet behind her. He wasn't in uniform. He was in a rumpled suit, his face a mask of exhaustion and cold fury. Two other orderlies, and the guard moved simultaneously, flanking her, cutting off all escape. The trap was sprung. Eliza Albright didn't panic. She didn't gasp. She slowly turned to face Miller, her mask of concerned professionalism snapping back into place, harder this time. Captain, she said, her voice smooth as glass. I was just trying to pay my respects. This guard seems to be having some trouble. He's doing his job, Eliza, Miller said, his voice a low gravel. But you're not. Your visit is over. I don't understand, she said, raising an eyebrow. Is this how you treat a civilian who is trying to help? You're not a civilian, and you're not here to help, Miller said. He took a step closer. We know, Eliza. We know everything. You know what? That I'm a concerned citizen? That I helped you access the building. She was good. She was perfect. She was a wall of plausible deniability. She was daring him to make a move. Miller was about to speak, but a new voice crackled to life over the hallway's intercom system. Chen's voice. Ask her about her father, Captain. The voice echoed, tinny and sharp, from the ceiling. Eliza's head snapped up. She looked around, confused, and then her eyes darted to the glass box down the hall. To the victim in the paper gown who was now standing, watching her. Ask her about Albright Capital Partners, Chen's voice continued, relentless. Ask her about the lawsuit in 1995. Ask her why she spent 22 years working for the two men who ruined her father and drove him to suicide. The color drained from Eliza Albright's face. The mask didn't just crack, it shattered. This wasn't a random accusation. This wasn't a guess. This was a direct hit. The one variable she had never, ever accounted for. The one she had dismissed as a poisoned, broken detective. You. Eliza whispered, her eyes locked on Chen's, a look of pure, unadulterated hatred twisting her perfect features. It was a brilliant plan, Chen's voice echoed in the silent hall. Find a broken, brilliant man. Fund his rage. Give him the tech, the access, the keys. Use his 30-year-old obsession to execute your own. Vance, Thorne, they were your targets. And Sullivan, he was just your poison. Your ghost. Your perfect, disposable weapon. Eliza didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stared at Chen, her entire 30-year plan dissolving into ash around her. She had been beaten. Not by the SWAT team. Not by the captain. But by a rookie detective in a glass box. Eliza Albright, Captain Miller said, his voice hard as iron. He pulled out a pair of handcuffs. You are under arrest for the murders of Harrison Vance, Julian Thorne, and for conspiracy to commit domestic terrorism. Eliza looked at the cuffs. She looked at Miller. And then, as the officer moved to take her arm, she looked back at Chen. And she smiled. A small, cold, final smile. You didn't win, she whispered, her voice too low for the intercom. You didn't win. Look at him. She nodded her head at Art Jensen's dark, still locked door. You can't stop the clock. You're too late. The officers cuffed her hands behind her back. The lilies she had been carrying clattered to the polished floor. The corridor was silent. Eliza Albright was gone, a whirlwind of cold fury and shattered pride, escorted by two grim-faced officers. The only remaining evidence of the confrontation was the scattered, pristine white lilies on the polished floor. Captain Miller stood alone in the hallway, his shoulders slumped. He looked for the first time like a man at the end of his career, not the beginning of a victory. He walked slowly back to Chen's glass enclosure. We got her, Chen, he said, his voice flat, exhausted, the words hollow over the intercom. Financial crimes is already tearing her office apart. Found the offshore accounts she used to fund Sullivan. Found the encrypted drives. It's over. You did it. You closed his last case. Chen was still standing, her hand pressed to the glass. The adrenaline from the confrontation was draining away, leaving her weak, her knees trembling. The victory felt cold. What did she mean, Captain? Chen asked, her voice a whisper. You can't stop the clock. You're too late. Miller's face, which had held a moment of grim satisfaction, collapsed back into a mask of grief. He didn't have to answer. The heavy steel door to Art's unit hissed open. Dr. Eris stepped out, not with urgency, but with a terrible, slow finality. He was pulling off his medical gloves. He looked at Miller and Chin. She wasn't lying, Dr. Eris said, his voice raw. The improvement we faked. It was just that. A fake. In reality, his condition is deteriorating. Rapidly. Chin felt the floor drop out from under her. But he was stable. He was, Eris said, walking over to the glass. But the toxin, it's insidious. It's not a simple poison, it's a cascading protein. It's bonding to his neural receptors. The plasmapheresis is removing it from his blood, but we can't get it out of his brain. His organs are beginning to fail. Kidney, liver, now his respiratory drive. The machines are breathing for him. Completely. He looked at Miller. We faked the chart to catch a killer. But the truth is, he has less than 24 hours. The words hung in the air, heavier and more deadly than any bomb. They had won. They had caught the mastermind. And Art Jensen was still going to die. Eliza Albright had lost, but she was still going to get her final, spiteful victory. No, Chin said, shaking her head. No. There has to be something. An antidote. You said you were working on one. We did, Eris said, holding up his hands. We synthesized a compound based on Sullivan's own notes from the burrow. It's an enzyme designed to break the protein bonds. But it's radical. It's completely untested. We have no idea what it will do to a human. What are you saying? Miller asked. I'm saying, Eris said, his eyes hard, that this injection could be the one thing that reverses the damage. Or, it could be a catastrophic accelerant. It could cause a massive, fatal stroke. It could stop his heart cold. It's not a medicine, detectives. It's a gamble. A pure 1 in a million shot in the dark. And you want us to make that call, Miller said. He has no family on file, Eris said quietly. You, Captain, are his next of kin in the department. And you, Detective Chen, are his partner. The hospital's ethics board, they won't approve this. It has to be you. Miller looked at Chen, his face an atlas of impossible choices. He was a man of procedure, of rules. This was chaos. Chen looked past them both, at the dark, silent door to Art's room. She saw him not as the still, comatose form, but as the man in the tunnel, roaring, swinging a steel pipe, refusing to be beaten by a ghost. He was a man who didn't play the odds. He made them. He was 7 days from retirement. He wasn't going to spend them dying in a bed because they were afraid to roll the dice. Do it, Chen said, her voice clear and hard. Miller and Eris both looked at her. Do it, Doctor, she repeated, her gaze unflinching. He didn't get this far by playing it safe. He's a fighter. Give him the weapon. Dr. Eris held her gaze for a long second, then nodded. I'll prep the injection. He walked back into the room. Miller and Chen were left alone in the corridor, two detectives on opposite sides of the glass, watching as a doctor prepared to either save their friend or execute him. The final clock had started. The world contracted to the space between two panes of glass. Chen stood in her sterile room. Miller stood in the sterile corridor. And in the room between them, Art Jensen lay on the threshold of death. The arrest of Eliza Albright felt like a lifetime ago. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only a cold, hollow dread. The capture was a hollow victory if the cost was Art's life. They waited. There was no clock in Chen's room, but she could feel the seconds passing, each one a hammer blow against Art's failing body. The hum of the air filtration was the only sound, a mechanical, uncaring breath. Miller hadn't moved. He was a statue in a rumpled suit, his eyes fixed on Art's door. The door hissed open. Dr. Eris re-entered, followed by a nurse. Both were in full, bright yellow biocontainment suits, their faces obscured by bubble helmets and respirators. They looked like astronauts entering a hostile, alien world. The nurse was pushing a small, chrome cart. On it was a single, large syringe, filled with a fluid so pale it was almost clear. The enzyme. The weapon. The 1 in a million shot. Chen pressed her palms flat against the glass. Her own breath fogged the surface. She was a ghost, a spectator at the most important moment of her life. She watched, her heart hammering against her ribs, as Dr. Eris took the syringe. He checked the monitors, spoke to the nurse, his voice an inaudible murmur, and then leaned over Art. He found the central line port on Art's chest. He cleaned it. He raised the syringe. He looked up once, his eyes meeting Chen's through 2 layers of glass and a plastic helmet. It was a look of pure, shared uncertainty. Then, he pushed the plunger. He injected the antidote slowly. A controlled, deliberate 10-second push, introducing the radical, untested enzyme directly into his partner's heart. For a full minute, nothing happened. The monitors continued their grim, steady, mechanical rhythm. The only change was the 2 doctors, standing back, waiting. And then, all hell broke loose. The monitor above Art's bed, the one displaying his heart rhythm, dissolved into a frantic, unreadable scribble. A high-pitched, solid alarm blasted from inside Art's room, a sound so loud it penetrated even Chen's sealed door. What's happening? Miller roared, banging on Art's window. Dr. Eris was already moving. He's in VFib. He's crashing. Get the cart. Through the glass, Chen watched in pure, silent horror. The frantic scribble on the monitor gave way to the single, most terrifying sound in the world. A long, unbroken, flatline tone. B. No, Chen whispered, her knees buckling. She slammed her fist against the glass. No, Art, don't you quit. Dr. Eris was on Art's chest, performing brutal, rhythmic compressions. Push one of AP, he shouted. The nurse injected something into the 4. The line remained flat. He's gone, Miller said, his voice broken. He turned away from the window, pressing the heels of his hands into his eyes. Oh God, Chen. We killed him. Clear. Eris's voice shouted. The paddles. Chen watched as Art's body arched violently off the bed. The line stayed flat. Again. Clear. Another jolt. Nothing. Dr. Eris stopped compressions. He was breathing heavily, his helmet fogging. The nurse had her hands over her own mask. The flatline tone was the only sound in the universe. It was the sound of failure. The sound of the end. Chen slid down the glass wall, her legs gone, tears of rage and grief blurring her vision. It was over. Albright had won. The poison had won. Dr. Eris reached a gloved hand toward the monitor, his finger moving to the button to silence the alarm and call the time of death. Beep. It was so small, so faint, it was almost imaginary. Dr. Eris froze. His hand hovered over the button. Everyone stared at the monitor. The flat line was gone. In its place, a single, green blip. A pause that stretched for an eternity. Beep. Another one. Weaker this time. And then, nothing. "Come on, Art," Miller whispered, his face pressed to the glass. "Come on, you stubborn old bastard. Fight." Beep, beep. A new, shaky rhythm appeared on the screen. It was slow. It was erratic. But it was not a flat line. Dr. Eris and the nurse stared at the monitor, dumbfounded. The enzyme wasn't just an antidote. It was a war. And Art's body was the battlefield. The rhythm strengthened. Beep, 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 beep. It was gaining speed. It was finding a pattern. It was normal. A slow, steady, sinus rhythm. Dr. Eris slowly turned. He looked at Miller. He looked at Chen, who was now on her knees, staring up at him. Through the plastic of his helmet, through the 2 panes of glass, he raised one yellow, gloved hand. He gave them a thumbs up. A choked, hysterical sound, half laugh, half sob, tore itself from Chen's throat. Miller was on his radio, his voice cracking. I need an update. Get Eris on the line. I think he's back. I think the detective is back." Chen watched as Dr. Eris, in a gesture of pure profound relief, sagged against the bed rail, his helmet bowed. The case was closed. The mastermind was in chains. And Art Jensen, 7 days from retirement, had just beaten death itself. The final twist wasn't a killer. It was a cure. One week later, the rain had finally stopped. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, sunlight streamed through a window, illuminating the small dust motes dancing in the quiet air. Sarah Chen was not in a glass box. She was wearing jeans and a department sweater, her hair pulled back in its familiar, severe ponytail. The metallic taste was gone, the tremors had stopped. She was sitting in a standard, uncomfortable hospital visitor's chair. Across from her, Detective Art Jensen, looking pale, gaunt, and about 20 pounds lighter, was in a heated, one-sided argument with a small cup of lime green jello. "It's unnatural," he rasped, his voice still rough. "It jiggles. It has no business being food. I'm not eating it. It's better than the antidote, Art. Trust me," Chen said, a small, tired smile playing on her lips. "How are you feeling? For real?" Art let the plastic spoon drop. He leaned back against the thin pillows, the movement clearly an effort. "Like I climbed 50 flights of stairs, got hit by a steam train, and then was used as a test dummy for a mad scientist. But," he added, looking at his hands, which were surprisingly steady, "I'm breathing. And the air, it doesn't smell like almonds." "That's a bonus," Chen said softly. A comfortable silence settled between them. The sounds of the hospital, the soft beep of monitors, the distant squeak of a cart, were a peaceful backdrop. "So," Art said finally, his eyes finding hers, "you're not in a glass box. I assume that's good news." "They cleared me 2 days ago," Chen said. "My exposure was minimal." Dr. Evans said, "He said I was lucky. You took the brunt of it, Art. You breathed in that hell for too long." "Yeah, well," Art grumbled, "I always did hate bad air quality. Now, tell me, did we get her?" Chen nodded. "We got her. Eliza Albright. She's in a federal holding cell. No bail. Her lawyers are trying to claim she was coerced by Sullivan, that he was the unstable genius. It won't stick." Miller's team found the encrypted drives in her office. The offshore accounts she used to fund him for 30 years. The blueprint modifications for the tunnel access. "We have her, Art. Cold. It's done. For real this time." "And the apex?" Chen's smile faded. "$1 billion tomb. Hazmat teams will be decontaminating it for a year. The air, the water." Sullivan, in a way, he got his wish. He didn't just kill Vance and Thorne. He killed the building. No one's living in the Great Sterilization for a very, very long time. Art nodded, absorbing it. He looked out the window at the bright, clean sky. "So, that's it. My last case. Closed." "Yeah. About that," Chen said, leaning forward. "Your 7 days? They came and went. While you were asleep. Your official retirement date was 3 days ago. Ha! Art stared out the window. Retired. No badge. No gun. No more acidic coffee. It's what you wanted, right? Chen asked gently. The quiet life. Paperwork. Art was quiet for a long time. He looked at his hands, then at Chen, then at the bustling city outside. The quiet life, he said, the word sounding foreign. It sounds boring. Chen's smile returned, this time with a spark of its own. Good. Because Captain Miller stopped by this morning. He said your retirement papers got lost in the mail. A clerical error. He said your badge is waiting in his desk, right next to a bottle of cheap whiskey. After your medical leave, of course. Which will be long. Art snorted. And do what? Sit at a desk. I'm too old to be a rookie again, and I'm sure as hell not chasing runners. He's not asking you to be a detective, Chen said. He's starting a new unit. After this, a citywide task force. For guys like Sullivan and Albright. Bio-digital threats. He needs someone to run it. A consultant. Someone who's seen the impossible and, shot it in the face. A slow, tired, but genuine smile spread across Art Jensen's face. A consultant. I like the sound of that. No running. No climbing. Just thinking. And telling people like you what to do. I think you'll just be telling me where to get the coffee, Art, she scoffed. That too. But it won't be this swill, he said, nudging the jello cup. So, the final twist in the detective's last case. Chin leaned back, crossing her arms. What was it, Art? The final twist. Was it Albright? The antidote? Art looked at her, his eyes, no longer fogged with poison, but sharp and clear. No. The final twist, he said, looking back out at the city he had, against all odds, saved. Is that the last case was a lie. It was just the case that changed the job. The end of one story is just the start of another. So you're taking the job, Chin stated. It wasn't a question. Someone has to, Art said. These new age killers, they're too much for rookies. They need experience. Is that what you call yourself now? Experience. That's right, Art said, shifting in the bed, the first sign of his old authority returning. Now, get that green poison out of here, Chin. And go find me a real cup of coffee. We've got work to do. Chin stood up, grabbing the jello. Yes, sir, detective. She paused at the door, a real smile, bright as the new sun, on her face. Welcome back.